Marcus Hayes slammed both hands flat on the conference table, so hard the water glasses shook. Every executive in that room froze. He looked directly at Victoria Sterling, the woman holding his termination letter, and said the one thing nobody in that building had the courage to say out loud. "You are about to destroy the wrong man, and one day you will know it." She signed the letter anyway. That was the last time Marcus Hayes stood in a boardroom. But it was not the last time Victoria Sterling would hear his name. Drop a comment with your city. Let me know how far this story has traveled. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want miss where this goes. The conference room on the 14th floor of Sterling Foods headquarters was the kind of room designed to make people feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany table that could seat 20, a view of downtown Charlotte that said, "We built this and you didn't." Marcus Hayes had been in that room dozens of times over 8 years. Quality reviews, safety briefings, product launches. He knew which chair squeaked, which window had a draft in winter, which executive always arrived 12 minutes late and pretended he hadn't. He knew this company the way a man knows his own house. That morning, he sat at the far end of the table, not at his usual seat, and understood immediately what that meant. They had already decided. He watched them file in one by one. Ronald Greaves, VP of Operations, who never once looked Marcus in the eye during a meeting he couldn't control. Diane Fitch, head of legal, whose job that morning was clearly not to advise but to witness. Two men Marcus barely recognized from the board, expensive suits, blank expressions, there to observe. And then Victoria Sterling. She walked in last the way she always did. Controlled, unhurried. The kind of woman who had learned that the person who arrives last holds the power, and she had spent 2 decades proving that theory right. She set a single folder on the table in front of her. She did not open it. She looked at Marcus. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Hayes." He had worked for this company for 8 years. She called him Mr. Hayes. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not fear, something older than fear. The feeling a man gets when he realizes the verdict was decided before the trial began. "Of course," Marcus said. He kept his voice even. He had promised himself on the drive-in that morning, with Lily's crayon drawing still sitting on his passenger seat, a purple bakery she'd drawn for a school project. Daddy's Bakery, written in crooked letters across the top. He had promised himself he would not give them the satisfaction of watching him break. Ronald cleared his throat. "Marcus, as you know, the company has completed its internal review of the product line 7 failure." "I know," the FDA inquiry, the retailer recalls. "I know what happened, Ronald. I was the one who filed the first warning report. 14 weeks before the recall." Silence moved through the room like weather. Victoria Sterling did not flinch. "We appreciate the work you've done here." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. He had always respected her, in the complicated way a man respects someone whose intelligence he acknowledges even when he disagrees with their choices. She had built Sterling Foods from a mid-size regional brand into a nationally recognized company. She was sharp, she was decisive, she was also, in that moment, choosing not to see him. Victoria. He used her first name deliberately, carefully, and he watched something flicker behind her eyes. "I want to ask you one question." "One." She glanced at Ronald. Then back at Marcus. "Go ahead. Did you read my reports? The ones from February, March, and April, the quality flags I submitted directly to operations and copied to your office?" A pause. Brief. But Marcus had been in enough rooms with enough people to know when a pause meant yes, and when it meant I am deciding what to say. "Our legal team has reviewed all relevant documentation." "That's not what I asked you." Diane Fitch sat up straighter. Ronald shifted in his chair. The two board observers remained perfectly still, the way people remain still when they've been told to observe and not intervene, no matter what. Victoria Sterling set her hands flat on the table. "Marcus, this review has concluded that the failures in product line 7 are attributable to decisions made in quality oversight. My department flagged those failures 3 times, in writing, and the company has made the difficult decision to restructure the quality management division, effective immediately." The word restructure sat in the room, like a stone dropped in still water. Marcus breathed in through his nose. He had told himself he would not do this. He had promised Lily that morning. She was still asleep when he left, her hair spread across the pillow. One arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit he'd bought her when she turned 5. He had kissed her forehead and whispered, "Daddy's going to be okay." He had made himself believe it, but something moved through him in that moment that he could not control. Not rage, not panic, something truer than both. He stood up. He placed both hands flat on that mahogany table, and he leaned forward, and every single person in that room went still. Because there are moments when a man's stillness carries more force than any raised voice. "You are about to destroy the wrong man." His voice was quiet, precise, and one day you will know it. He picked up his coffee mug, the one he'd brought from his office, the one Lily had painted for him at one of those ceramic studios, his name in lopsided blue letters, and he walked out. He did not slam the door. Slamming doors was for people who still believed someone on the other side was listening. The HR manager, a young woman named Priya, who had always been kind to him, met him in the hallway outside his office with a cardboard box and an expression that told him she was ashamed of what she had to do. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. They've asked that I know." He took the box from her gently. "It's not your fault, Priya." She looked like she might cry. She was young enough that this was probably one of the first times she'd had to do this. Young enough that the gap between what a company says it values and what it actually does still surprised her. "I thought you should know," she said quietly, quickly. Glancing over her shoulder, Greaves had those reports pulled from the shared server the week before the board meeting. The AT logs. Priya might show stop. He looked at her. "Don't put yourself in the middle of this." She swallowed. Someone should. He carried his box to the elevator. Someone had already deactivated his key card. The security guard, a man named Doug, who Marcus had upon Pluto coffee on cold mornings, who Marcus had talked football with for 8 years, met him at the lobby door with an apologetic expression that Marcus suspected was the truest thing he'd seen all day. "I'm sorry, Mark. Take care of yourself, Doug." He walked out into the October air. He sat in his car for a long time without starting it. The purple bakery drawing was still on the passenger seat. Daddy's Bakery in Lily's handwriting. She'd given it to him 2 weeks ago when she'd gone through a phase of wanting to know what it meant to own a business, because her third-grade teacher had done a unit on entrepreneurs, and Lily had come home buzzing with questions. "Daddy, what would your business be if you could have any business?" "I don't know, baby girl. I think you'd have a bakery, because you make the best French toast, and French toast is basically just fancy bread." He had laughed harder than he had in months. He looked at the drawing now. He looked at his daughter's handwriting, the slightly backwards D in Daddy, the way she'd drawn little hearts in the windows of the building, and he made himself a promise. She would never see him destroyed. She would see him rebuild. Whatever that took. What it took, it turned out, was humiliation in doses he had not prepared for. Marcus was 51 years old. He had a master's degree in food science from NC State. He had 8 years of documented, measurable success at a company that was now, quietly and efficiently, erasing his name from that success. He had also, within 2 weeks of his termination, discovered exactly how quickly a professional reputation can be dismantled by people who have both the motive and the infrastructure to do it. He found out about the Whisper campaign the way you usually find out about things designed to be kept from you. A former colleague, someone he trusted, called him on a Saturday afternoon and said, "Marcus, I don't know if you've seen what's being said, but you need to know." What was being said, in the careful, deniable language of industry networks and LinkedIn comment sections and private Slack channels, was that Marcus Hayes had known about the product line 7 issues earlier than he'd disclosed, that he had delayed reporting in order to make his metrics look cleaner, that the 3 warning reports he was so proud of were actually written after the fact and backdated. It was a lie precise enough to be believable, because the truth that his reports had been filed correctly and then quietly buried was not a story anyone at Sterling Foods was going to confirm. 3 job interviews came and went. One recruiter ghosted him completely after what had been a promising first call. A food industry consultant he'd known for years suddenly stopped returning his messages. Lily's school tuition auto-drafted in November and again in December, and Marcus sat with his laptop open and his bank account summary on the screen and did the math 3 different ways, hoping somehow the numbers would change. They didn't. He sold his car and bought an older one. He gave up the apartment he'd had for 6 years, the one with the second bedroom, where Lily had painted the walls herself lavender and yellow, because she said those were sunrise colors, and moved them into a 2-bedroom rental that smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. Lily did not complain. She was 8 years old, and she did not complain once, which was more than Marcus could say for himself in his lowest private moments, lying awake at 2 a.m. with the specific exhaustion of a man who is afraid not for himself but for his child. The thing about being afraid for your child, not for yourself, but for them, is that it cuts differently. It doesn't make you want to give up. It makes you desperate in a way that is simultaneously terrifying and clarifying. He could not afford to stay still, so he looked for a way forward. He found it in the most unlikely place. He'd been driving Lily to school one morning. She'd fallen asleep in the back seat the way she sometimes did, and Marcus had the radio off because he didn't want to wake her when he took a wrong turn in a town he didn't know well. A small coastal town about 2 hours from Charlotte that he'd driven through maybe twice in his life. The town was the kind of place that used to be something and was trying to figure out what it wanted to be next. Old storefronts, some renovated, some not. A harbor with actual fishing boats. Streets wide enough that they'd probably once been meant for something other than 2 lanes of light traffic. He made his wrong turn and ended up on a corner, and there was a building. He didn't know why he stopped. He almost didn't. He had places to be, things to worry about, a child sleeping in the back seat, and approximately no reason to pull over in front of an abandoned building on a corner in a town he barely knew. But he stopped. He got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. It was a mess. There was no other word for it. The windows were cracked and filmed with years of grime. The sign above the door had faded to the point where you could barely read the name Rosalie's, but you could see the shape of it. The painted bread loaves on either side of the letters, the border of little flowers that someone had once painted by hand with obvious care. The front door had a padlock on it, and a real estate notice in the window. Marcus stood there for a long time. A woman walking a dog slowed down next to him. She was probably in her 70s, silver hair, a no-nonsense quality that reminded him of his grandmother. "You looking at Rosalie's?" "Just stop to look. It's been empty 3 years. Rosalie passed. Her kids live up in Boston. They don't want it." Marcus looked at the faded sign, the little painted flowers. What was it like when it was open? The woman tilted her head. "Best cinnamon rolls in the county. Rosalie started it herself in 1908. It was the kind of place where people actually knew your name. Town feels different without it." She studied him. "You a developer or something?" "No," Marcus said. And then, almost without intending to, "I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life." The woman looked at him for a moment. "Well," she said, "there's worse places to start." She walked on. Marcus stood on that corner for another 10 minutes. Then he got back in the car. 2 weeks later, he called the number on the real estate notice. The price was low because the condition was terrible and nobody wanted it. Marcus's savings were not what they'd been, not after the months of unemployment, the legal consultation he'd paid for out of pocket, the move, but they were enough. Barely. He had enough for the purchase and what he calculated on a legal pad with a calculator, and Lily, sitting across the kitchen table doing her homework, was a 4-month operating runway. 4 months to make the bakery work or run out of money completely. "Is this scary?" Lily asked, not looking up from her math. "Yes," she nodded. Like that was a reasonable answer, and kept doing her homework. She was, Marcus had come to understand, a child who appreciated honesty more than reassurance. She had her mother's ability to look at a situation clearly, without sentiment, and decide how she felt about it on her own terms. He missed her mother in moments like that. Keisha had died when Lily was 3, a car accident, fast and senseless and complete. And Marcus had spent the years since trying to be both things, father and the kind of steady presence a mother provides. Knowing he was imperfect at both and doing it anyway because there was no other option. Lily had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and Marcus considered both of those things a gift. "I think we should paint it blue," Lily said. "The bakery? The outside, like the ocean, since it's near the water. We're 2 miles from the water, still counts." He didn't paint it blue, but he wrote it down. The first morning he worked on the bakery, he arrived at 5 a. m. With a crowbar, a shop vac, a bucket of cleaning supplies, and a thermos of coffee. He stood in the middle of the main floor and turned slowly, taking inventory. The ovens were old, but he thought they might work. The cases were scratched but solid. The counter needed to be refinished. The back storage area had water damage along one wall. The bathroom needed everything replaced. He looked at all of it. Then he picked up the crowbar, walked to the wall with the worst water damage, and started pulling away the rotted drywall so he could see what was underneath and know exactly what he was dealing with. He worked until 8 o'clock. Then he went and picked up Lily from her friend's house where she'd slept over, took her to school, came back, and worked until noon. This was his life for 6 weeks. He learned things he had never expected to learn at 51. How to assess structural damage, how to reroute a simple plumbing connection, how to strip a floor and what it looked like underneath when the wood was actually good old growth, solid, waiting. He watched YouTube videos in the evenings with Lily beside him on the couch, both of them learning, Lily asking questions and sometimes having better answers than he did. "That guy's doing it wrong," Lily said one evening, pointing at the screen. "You're supposed to go with the grain. Where did you learn that?" Rosalie's YouTube channel. What? It turned out Rosalie, the original owner, who had died 3 years ago at 81, had a YouTube channel. 52 videos. The last one posted 6 years ago. A white-haired woman in a flour-dusted apron, teaching viewers how to make pan bread, cinnamon rolls, blueberry muffins, butter biscuits. Her voice was unhurried and warm, and she called her viewers honey without it sounding performed. Marcus and Lily watched every single video. By the end, Lily had taken notes in a spiral notebook she'd labeled Rosalie's book in her careful handwriting. "She has a recipe for peach cobbler," Lily announced. "I know, I saw. We should make it for the bakery. We should learn how to make it first. We could learn by making it." For the bakery. Marcus looked at his daughter. 8 years old. Flower drawing, note-taking, strategically logical, 8 years old. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, let's learn by making it." The bakery's first product was Rosalie's peach cobbler, made twice before they got it right, and exactly once before Lily declared it ready, and Marcus believed her. The second product was Marcus's own French toast bread, a brioche-style loaf with a faint cinnamon sweetness baked, in which he had been making on weekends for years, and which Lily had always insisted was the best thing he made. He sourced local peaches. He found a flour mill 2 counties overrun by a family that had been in the business for 4 generations, and who, when Marcus explained what he was trying to do, gave him a good price and a handshake that felt like a promise. He put handwritten notes next to every item in the case, the way Lily suggested. Little cards explaining where the ingredients came from, who Rosalie was, why Marcus had named the bakery after her. The neighbors started coming because one of them, the woman with the silver hair and the dog, told people about the man who was fixing up the old place. Then they came back because the peach cobbler was extraordinary. Marcus hired one person, a woman named Cecilia, mid-60s, who had worked in restaurant kitchens for 30 years and was currently between jobs on the basis of a conversation, a handshake, and a shared cinnamon roll that Marcus asked her to evaluate professionally. She took one bite, chewed it slowly, and said, "Your lamination's a little uneven. But this is good bread. I'll work for you." The bakery was not profitable yet. It was busy, and it was growing, and it was Marcus could feel this in a way he had not felt in a workplace since the early years at Sterling Foods Real. People were coming because they wanted to be there, not because algorithms had placed the shop in their feed or a discount coupon had driven them through the door. They were coming because the bread was good and the space felt human, and Marcus Hayes stood behind that counter every morning and knew his customers' names. He was building something. He didn't know yet what it would cost him to protect it. The bell above the door rang on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Marcus was behind the counter, packaging an order of biscuits for a woman who came in every Tuesday and always took the same thing, half a dozen buttermilk biscuits, and 1 slice of the French toast bread, toasted with butter. He heard the door. He heard the quality of the sustenance that followed it. He looked up. Victoria Sterling was standing in the doorway of his bakery. She was wearing a coat he recognized, charcoal wool, the kind that cost more than most people's rent, and she was holding a leather portfolio case. And behind her, slightly to the left, was a man in a suit who had the particular stillness of someone paid to stand near people and not speak. A lawyer or something like it. Marcus finished wrapping the biscuits. He handed the bag to the Tuesday woman and said, "See you next week, Mrs. Carroll." "Thank you, sweetheart." She left. The bakery was otherwise empty. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron. He looked at Victoria Sterling across the counter of Rosalie's bakery, in the small coastal town 2 hours from Charlotte, 8 months after she had signed his termination letter, without looking him in the eyes. "We're closed," Marcus said. "It's 2 in the afternoon. We close at 2. A pause. "Marcus." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Controlled. Measured. The voice of a woman who had trained herself to reveal nothing she didn't choose to reveal. "What do you want, Victoria?" She set the portfolio on the counter. She opened it. Inside were documents, property assessments, zoning maps, a cover sheet with the Sterling Foods corporate logo. Marcus looked at the documents, then at her. "The company is looking to develop this block," she said. "We're prepared to offer you a very fair..." "No." She paused. "You haven't heard the figure. I don't need to." "Marcus, this is not a negotiation." He kept his voice even. Quiet. The same way he'd kept his voice quiet in that conference room. "This bakery is not for sale. Not to your company. Not to you, not to anyone. I built this from nothing, and it belongs to this neighborhood, and I am not moving." Victoria Sterling looked at him. He looked back. And somewhere in the silence between them, something shifted, not resolved, not forgiven, not even acknowledged yet, but something moved. Because the man standing across that counter was not the man she remembered. Or perhaps, and this was the thought that followed her out of the bakery, down the steps, into the car, all the way back to Charlotte. Perhaps he was exactly the man he had always been, and she simply hadn't looked. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He forgot to drink and a legal pad full of numbers. The bakery was working, but the woman who had once destroyed everything he built now knew exactly where to find him. And something told Marcus Hayes that she hadn't come here just about a building. He just didn't know yet what she had actually come for. Victoria Sterling did not go back to the bakery the next day. She was not a woman who repeated herself without purpose. She had learned that early in boardrooms, in negotiations, in the particular kind of warfare that women in her position were required to conduct with more precision than their male counterparts, because the margin for error was narrower, and the cost perceived as emotional was higher than any mistake she could make on paper. She went back to Charlotte. She sat in her car in the Sterling Foods parking garage for 4 minutes before going inside, which 4 minutes longer than she had ever sat in a parking garage doing nothing in her professional life. Then she went upstairs, scheduled 3 meetings, and told herself she had done what was required. The bakery owner had declined. She would find another approach to the development project. There were adjacent properties. There were legal avenues. There were options. She opened the property file on her laptop and stared at it for 11 minutes without reading a single word. Marcus Hayes's face kept interrupting her thoughts. Not the face she remembered from the termination meeting, tight, controlled, the specific expression of a man who has decided that dignity is the only thing left to protect. A different face. The face of a man behind a counter, unhurried, finishing what he was doing for another customer before he acknowledged her presence, as if she were not the most powerful person in any room she entered, but simply someone who had walked through a door. He had wiped his hands on his apron before he looked at her. That detail lodged itself somewhere she couldn't locate and couldn't dislodge. She called Ronald Greaves at 4:30. "The Hayes property is going to be a problem. He turned us down? He turned me down, which is different." She pulled up the zoning map. "What are our legal options for the permit review?" A pause on Ronald's end. Brief, but she noticed it. "I can have someone look into whether his operating permits were filed correctly. Small jurisdictions sometimes have compliance gaps. I want to know our options. I don't want anything done without my approval." Of course, she hung up. She did not fully trust Ronald Greaves. She had never fully trusted Ronald Greaves. But she had trusted his results. And in the years she had been building this company, she had made the error that many executives make. She had confused the delivery of results with the integrity of the person delivering them. It was an error she would spend the next month understanding the full cost of. But that evening, sitting at her desk in the empty office after her assistant had gone home, what Victoria Sterling did not know, could not have known, was that the same man she had tried to buy out that afternoon was 30 miles away, sitting at a kitchen table across from his 8-year-old daughter, and the little girl was looking at him with her mother's eyes and asking a question that would stay with Marcus for weeks. "Daddy, was that lady mean to you before?" Marcus set down his coffee. "What lady?" "The one who came to the bakery today," Mrs. Carroll told Cecilia, "and Cecilia told me. She said a lady in a fancy coat came and you asked her to leave." Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment. Lily was watching him with that particular quality of attention she had, focused and patient, and completely unwilling to accept a deflection she could see coming. "She wasn't mean. She came to ask me something and I said no." "What did she ask?" "She wanted to buy the bakery." Lily blinked. "She wanted to buy Rosalie's?" "Yeah." "Did she know you just fixed it?" "I think she knew." Lily was quiet for a moment, turning this over with the seriousness she brought to things she considered genuinely important. "Was she the one from your old job?" The one who she stopped herself. Not because she didn't know what she was going to say, but because she had learned in the quiet, absorptive way that children learn the things their parents never formally teach them, that some questions needed to be asked carefully. Marcus looked at her. He had decided early in this that he would not lie to Lily. Not about the big things. She was 8, not 3. She had watched him lose a job, sell a car, move apartments, and spend 6 weeks with paint on his face and sawdust in his hair, rebuilding something from nothing. She deserved honesty delivered at the right altitude. "Yeah, baby, she was." Lily absorbed this. "Why did she want your bakery?" "It's not about the bakery. It's about the land, the corner. Her company wants to build something here, but we're already here." "We are, so she can't. Not if I don't let her." Another silence. Lily pulled her spiral notebook, Rosalie's book, toward her, and opened it to a page of her own handwriting. Marcus had come to recognize this gesture. It meant she was transitioning from conversation to thinking, which in Lily's case looked like writing things down. "What are you writing?" "A list of reasons she can't have our bakery," she wrote without looking up. "Number 1, we already live here. Number 2, Rosalie's name is on the door. Number 3, Mrs. Carroll needs her Tuesday biscuits." Marcus laughed, the real kind. The kind that came from somewhere he hadn't expected. And Lily smiled without looking up, pleased with herself, still writing. He watched her and felt the particular fierce tenderness that had become the gravity of his life, the thing everything else orbited around. And he thought, this is why. Whatever comes next, this is why. What came next arrived sooner than he expected. 3 days after Victoria's visit, Marcus received a certified letter from the county zoning office. His operating permits were under review. A third-party compliance audit had been requested for food safety standards. He would need to cease certain production activities, specifically the use of the rear kitchen ovens, until the review was complete. The letter was professional, bureaucratic, thorough, and almost certainly not coincidental. Cecilia was in the kitchen when Marcus came through the back door with the letter in his hand. She was rolling dough with the focused efficiency of a woman who had done it 10,000 times and didn't need to think about the motion anymore. "You look like someone hit your car." Marcus laid the letter flat on the stainless steel prep table. Cecilia dried her hands and read it. She read it once, then again. Then she set it back down with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to react before she understood the full situation. "The rear ovens. Yeah, those are our production ovens. The front oven does the display pastries. If we can't use the rear..." "I know, Marcus. I know, Cecilia." She put her hands on her hips. "Who requested this audit?" "The letter doesn't say." "Third-party compliance firm. Filed through the county." Cecilia looked at him. She had been in the restaurant industry for 30 years. She had worked for people who cut corners and people who didn't, in kitchens that ran clean and kitchens that didn't, for owners who cared and owners who saw their staff as a line item. She had learned to read situations quickly and without sentimentality. "The woman in the fancy coat." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get a lawyer." "That cost money." "I know that too." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the letter, folded it precisely along its original creases, and handed it back to him. I've got a cousin who does property compliance work. Not a lawyer, but she knows the zoning code better than most lawyers do. She helped a restaurant owner in Greensboro fight a similar review 2 years ago. Did he win? And yes, Marcus took the letter. Can you call her today? I'm going to call her right now. Cecilia was already pulling her phone from her apron pocket. You go make the French toast loaves. If we can only use the front oven, we use the front oven. We don't stop. No, Marcus said, we don't stop. He went to the front oven. He made the loaves. He opened the bakery at 7 the next morning and did not mention the permit review to anyone because the neighbors and the Tuesday regulars and the families who came on weekends didn't need to carry his problems. And because the best thing he could do in that moment was the same thing he'd been doing since he bought this place, show up and do the work. But he called the county zoning office himself that afternoon. He was on hold for 22 minutes. When a clerk finally picked up, Marcus explained the situation and asked who had filed the audit request. I'm not able to disclose the requesting party, sir. Is that information publicly available through a records request? A pause. You could submit a Freedom of Information request? Yes. How long does that take? Typically 30 to 60 days. Marcus thanked the clerk and hung up. 30 to 60 days. With the rear ovens shut down, his production capacity was cut by nearly 60%. He did the math in his head the way he'd been doing math for months, constantly, quietly, the way you monitor something you're afraid of losing. 4 months of runway had become 3. 3 might become 2 if the review stretched long enough and his revenue dropped in proportion to his production. He submitted the FOIA request that afternoon. Then he went back to work. Cecilia's cousin, whose name was Dorothea, and who arrived at the bakery on a Saturday morning with a binder full of zoning code printouts and an expression that suggested she had seen this exact situation before, walked through the kitchen, examined the rear ovens, reviewed his original permit applications, and then sat across from Marcus at the counter with a cup of coffee he'd poured her and said, "Your permits are fine." Then why? Because whoever filed this audit request knows that fine and cleared are two different things, and cleared takes time. This is a delay tactic, Mr. Hayes. Somebody's betting you can't afford to wait them out. Marcus wrapped his hands around his own coffee cup. How do I speed up the review? You request an expedited hearing. You submit a petition, signed by community members, establishing the bakery as an essential local business. And you get someone from the county with actual authority to physically inspect the kitchen and confirm there's nothing wrong. How long does all that take? Dorothea looked at him steadily. If we move fast, 3 weeks. Maybe 2.5 if we're lucky, and the inspector has an opening. What if we're not lucky? 6 weeks, he did the math again. Ran the numbers. Thought about the flour mill family, and the peach supplier, and Cecilia's hours and Lily's school. Tell me what I need to do, Marcus said. First thing, you need signatures. A lot of them. This is a community case now, not just a business case. How well do you know your neighbors? Well enough. Then get to work. He got to work. What happened over the next 10 days surprised Marcus, not because it happened, but because of the speed and completeness of it. He knocked on doors. He explained the situation simply, without drama, without casting blame, just, the bakery is under a permit review, and I need community support for an expedited hearing. He was prepared to explain and advocate and persuade. He didn't need to. Mrs. Carroll signed the petition and called 4 of her friends, who each called 3 more people. The owner of the hardware store 2 blocks over not only signed, but wrote a separate letter describing the economic benefit the bakery had brought to foot traffic on the street. The pastor of the Methodist Church on Magnolia Avenue signed on behalf of the congregation, several of whom had been coming to the bakery after Sunday services. The woman who ran the used bookstore across the street made copies of the petition at her own expense and collected signatures from her customers. Within 8 days, Marcus had 214 signatures. He submitted them with the expedited hearing request and Dorothea's formal response to the audit. The county scheduled an inspection for the following Wednesday. The inspector, a man in his 60s named Mr. Tackert, who had clearly been doing this job long enough that nothing surprised him, walked through the kitchen with a clipboard, checked the ovens, reviewed the ventilation, opened every cabinet, tested every surface, and asked Marcus 6 questions. all of which Marcus answered correctly and could back up with documentation. At the end, Mr. Taggart closed his clipboard, looked around the kitchen, and said, "Mr. Hayes, your facility is in compliance. You'll have your cleared notice within 5 business days." Marcus shook the man's hand. After he left, Marcus stood alone in the kitchen for a moment. He exhaled. Then he called Lily at school. He wasn't supposed to. It was against the rule he'd set himself about interrupting her school day with his problems. But this didn't feel like a problem anymore. And when she picked up and whispered, "Daddy, I'm in class," he said. "We won. The bakery's okay." A pause. "I knew it," she whispered. "Okay, go back to class." "Dad, yeah, can we have peach cobbler tonight?" "Yeah, baby. We can have peach cobbler tonight." He hung up and stood in the cleared kitchen of Rosalie's bakery. And for the first time in 10 days, he let himself feel something other than focused, operational, forward-moving determination. He felt it for about 30 seconds. Then he put his apron back on and started on the afternoon loaves. The news traveled the way things travel in a small town, not through any single channel, but through a dozen simultaneous ones, each person telling the next in their own words. So that by the time the story reached its 10th telling, it had acquired small embellishments and emphasizing details that weren't in the original, but were emotionally accurate. The bakery had been attacked. The bakery had fought back. The bakery had won. What also traveled in a different direction, through different channels, was the story of what had happened. Who had filed the audit request? Who had tried to slow Marcus down? Marcus himself never said Victoria Sterling's name publicly. He didn't have to. The FOIA request came back in 19 days rather than 30, and the requesting party was listed as a compliance consultancy firm that Marcus had never heard of. But Dorothea had heard of it. "Pemberton Compliance Associates," she said, sitting at his counter again, reviewing the FOIA response. "They do a lot of work for Sterling Foods." Marcus read the name twice. Then he set the paper down. "Okay, Marcus, this means." "I know what it means." She looked at him. "Are you going to?" "I'm going to open the bakery in the morning," Marcus said. "Both ovens, full production, and I'm going to figure out the rest from there." She nodded slowly. "You know this isn't over, I know." It wasn't over. Victoria Sterling came back 2 weeks after the permit review was cleared. This time she came alone, no lawyer beside her, no portfolio of corporate documents. She was wearing a different coat, navy, simpler than the charcoal wool, and she stood outside the bakery door for a full minute before she came in, which Marcus knew, because he saw her through the window and made himself continue serving the customer in front of him without rushing. The bakery was mid-morning busy. Cecilia was in the back. A young man named Darnell, whom Marcus had recently hired 2 mornings a week, was running the register. 2 tables were occupied by people who came for the coffee and ended up staying. Victoria walked to the counter. She waited. When Darnell started to take her order, she said quietly, "I'd actually like to speak with Mr. Hayes if he's available." Marcus was 2 feet away, plating biscuits. "I'm here," Marcus said without looking up. He finished plating. He handed the plate across the counter to the man who'd ordered it. He turned to Darnell. "I've got the counter. Go help Cecilia with the bread trays." Darnell went. Marcus and Victoria Sterling faced each other across the counter of Rosalie's bakery, with the smell of fresh bread and coffee filling the space between them and 2 strangers at separate tables, quietly reading their phones. Victoria looked at the case of pastries, at the handwritten cards, at the photographs Marcus had hung behind the counter, one of Rosalie herself, from a newspaper article about the bakery's opening in 1987, and one of Lily on the first day they'd made peach cobbler together. Her face dusted with flour, and her expression deadly serious. "That your daughter?" "Yes." "How old?" 8, almost 9. Victoria nodded. She looked back at Marcus, the compliance review. "Yeah, I need you to know that I didn't." She stopped. Started again. "I asked Ronald to look into our legal options. I did not authorize a permit audit." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He was good at reading people. He had been good at it his whole life, good at finding the gap between what someone said and what they meant, between the story a person performed and the truth they were trying to manage. He had deployed this skill in 8 years of quality management, in boardrooms and supplier negotiations, and moments like the one that ended his career, When he looked around that conference room and understood what was happening before anyone said a word, he looked at Victoria Sterling. She was not lying. Or if she was the most controlled, perfectly calibrated liar he had ever encountered, and he had met some excellent ones. You asked Ronald Greaves to find legal options, Marcus said carefully. Yes, and a firm connected to Sterling Foods filed a permit audit against my business 2 weeks later. Yes, and you're telling me you didn't authorize that. I'm telling you I didn't authorize that. Marcus studied her. So what are you telling me, exactly? That someone working for you did something without your knowledge, or that you told him to look for options, and he found one and used it, and you're here because you found out, and it made you uncomfortable? Something moved across her face. It wasn't offense. It was closer to recognition. The expression of someone who has asked themselves the same question and is still working toward a truthful answer. I don't know yet, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said to him in the entire history of their acquaintance. Marcus absorbed it. He reached under the counter, poured a cup of coffee without asking, and set it in front of her. Not as a gesture of warmth, as a practical act. She was going to be standing at this counter for a few more minutes, and she might as well have something to do with her hands. She looked at the coffee, then at him. I'm not buying you anything, Marcus said. It's a cup of coffee. She picked it up. She did not thank him, which he appreciated more than he would have if she had. She drank, and then she said, the development project. The reason I came here originally. There are other properties. It doesn't have to be this corner. It doesn't? No. It doesn't. She set the cup down. I came back to tell you that. Marcus crossed his arms. Not defensively, thoughtfully. Why? Because. That's not an answer. Because I came here for a business reason, and I saw something that she stopped. Looked at the photograph of Lily behind the counter. It's a good bakery, Marcus. He looked at her. I know it is. I mean the neighborhood. The people. The way it works. She seemed to be struggling with something. Not the words themselves, but the permission to say them. I've been in this industry for 23 years, and I know what a community business looks like versus what a business that calls itself a community business looks like, and this is. She stopped again. Set her hands flat on the counter. It's the real thing. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then what do you want, Victoria? Actually want. Not the development project. Not legal options. What did you come here today to say? She met his eyes. I came to say that I think I made a mistake. The words landed between them with the particular weight of things that have been waiting a long time to be said. Marcus didn't move, didn't rush to fill the silence. He had learned over 8 months of building something from nothing, of being tested in ways that required him to be steady when everything around him was not. He had learned that some silences were doing necessary work and needed to be left alone to do it. The termination, Victoria said. Yeah, I signed that letter without. She seemed to recalibrate. I trusted the information I was given. I didn't verify it independently. I should have. You should have. I know. You should have read the reports, Victoria. My 3 reports. 14 weeks before the recall. You should have read them, and you should have asked me directly what I was seeing, and you should have trusted the person who had been protecting the integrity of your products for 8 years before you decided he was the problem. His voice was even, not raised, not cold, just honest in the particular way that honesty lands hardest without theatrics, without the softening that would allow the listener to focus on the performance rather than the truth. Victoria Sterling looked at him with an expression Marcus had never seen on her face before. Not in 8 years of quarterly reviews and company meetings and the 14 minutes of his termination. She looked like someone reckoning. You're right, she said. I know I am. Another silence. I can't give you 8 years back, Victoria said. No, you can't. I can look into what actually happened. With the investigation, with who said what. She seemed to be deciding something. There at his counter, coffee cup in front of her, fluorescent light of a Tuesday morning, making everything precise and unsparing. I want to look into it, not for legal reasons, because I need to know. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then he said, the FOIA response on the permit audit came back. The firm that filed it does a lot of work for Sterling Foods. Victoria's expression shifted. What firm? Pemberton Compliance Associates. He watched her process it, watched the sequence move across her face recognition. then a rapid internal calculation that he recognized because he had seen her make similar calculations in meetings. Except those had always been about markets and margins, not about integrity and betrayal. "Ronald," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I don't know," Marcus said. "I'm telling you what the FOIA said. I know what it means." "I do too." She looked at him directly. "I'm going to find out what happened. Both things, the termination and this." She picked up her coat from where she'd draped it over the counter. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I know I haven't earned that." Marcus nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. She started toward the door. "Victoria." She stopped. "If you find something," Marcus said, "I need to know. Not as a courtesy, because my name is still attached to a failed product launch that wasn't my fault, and that follows me. It follows me to every supplier I try to work with, and every investor who looks me up, and every person who hears the story third hand and decides what kind of man I am based on what your company said about me." She turned to face him. "I understand. I don't think you do. Not yet, but maybe you will." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she walked out of the bakery. Marcus stood at the counter alone for 30 seconds. Then Darnell came back from the bread trays, and a family of 4 walked in through the door, and the morning continued the way. Mornings at the bakery continued with warm bread and someone's coffee being too hot, and Lily's handwritten cards tilting sideways in their holders because the cases weren't perfectly level, and Marcus kept meaning to adjust them. He didn't think about Victoria Sterling for the rest of the morning. He thought about her in the afternoon when the bakery emptied and he sat on the back steps with Cecilia having the cup of coffee they'd made a ritual of. The 20 minutes at the end of the day where they talked through what had happened and what needed to happen tomorrow. Cecilia listened to his account of the morning with the expression she had for things that mattered, a focused, unhurried attention that reminded Savini's as though she tested bread, thorough and without rushing to conclusion. When he finished, she said, "You believe her? I don't know. But you let her talk, yes. That means something coming from you." Marcus drank his coffee. "It means I'm not going to get anywhere closing every door." Or, Cecilia said, with the precision of someone who had been watching him for months and had formed her own views, "It means you saw something in her that made you think she might actually do what she said." Marcus looked at the back wall of the building, the spot where the water damage had been, now plastered and painted over, solid and even. "Maybe," he said. Cecilia nodded. She stood up and took her cup inside. At the door she paused. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think the hardest thing about being the kind of man you are," she said, "is that you can't stop being able to see people clearly, even the ones who hurt you. And that's either your biggest weakness or your biggest gift." "I haven't decided which." She went inside. Marcus sat on the back steps in the early evening light and thought about what she'd said, and thought about Victoria Sterling's standing at his counter with her coffee cup and her careful words, and thought about Lily's notebook list, number 3, Mrs. Carroll needs her Tuesday biscuits, and thought about the 8 months that had brought him from a conference room, Charlotte, to a bakery to a biter in a small coastal town. Somewhere in the bakery, the timer on the proofing drawer went off. Marcus got up and went inside. There was bread to finish. There was always bread to finish. What he didn't know, sitting on those steps, was that Victoria Sterling had driven back to Charlotte and walked directly into Ronald Greaves's office and closed the door without announcing herself, which was something she had done exactly twice in the history of her relationship with the man, and both times it had preceded a conversation that changed the direction of something significant. She closed the door. Ronald looked up from his desk with an expression he quickly made neutral. "Pemberton compliance," Victoria said. Ronald's hands moved slightly on his desk. The smallest adjustment of papers that meant nothing and meant everything. "I don't know what don't." Her voice was quiet. The quiet she used when she had already run the calculation and arrived at an answer she didn't want but intended to act on anyway. Pemberton filed a permit audit against Marcus Hayes's bakery. Pemberton is on our approved vendor list. You are the primary contact for Pemberton. Ronald said nothing. "I need you to tell me," Victoria said, "if it was just the bakery, or if there's more." Ronald's expression did not move. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. The managed face, the careful bureaucratic neutrality that deflected accountability while neither confirming nor denying. She had valued it once, in a different way, when it was directed outward. It landed differently when it was directed at her. Ronald. There may have been, he paused, some management of the situation. During the Product Line 7 review. What kind of management? The kind that protected the company's position. Victoria looked at him for a long time. The kind that protected your position, she said. Ronald's hands moved again on the papers. Victoria Sterling had been a CEO for 11 years. She had handled crises, market collapses, regulatory investigations, hostile acquisition attempts, and one particularly brutal 2-year stretch, during which she had restructured a company in free fall and emerged on the other side having lost significant things and gained others. She had not, until that moment, in Ronald Greaves's office, at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening, ever sat with the specific knowledge that something she had signed her name to was built on a deliberate lie. It was a different kind of weight. Not the weight of a hard decision. The weight of a wrong one. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply looked at Ronald Greaves with the full force of what she now understood and said, "You're going to give me everything. Every email, every record, every correspondence related to the Product Line 7 investigation and to Marcus Hayes. You're going to give it to me today, and if I find out you've withheld anything, I will use every resource I have to ensure you are held accountable. Not managed, not quietly separated, not given a package and shown the door. Accountable. Do you understand me?" Ronald Greaves understood her. He gave her the files. Victoria sat in her car in the parking garage for significantly longer than 4 minutes this time. She read the first file by the light of her phone. By the second file, she understood what had been done. By the third, she understood what she had allowed not deliberately, not maliciously, but through the particular negligence of a powerful person who trusted the system she had built more than she verified it. Marcus Hayes had filed 3 reports. They were all there, time-stamped, comprehensive, exactly what he had described in that conference room before she signed the letter. The reports had been received. They had been logged. And then they had been classified in a way that buried them beneath a layer of subsequent documentation so that they were technically present in the record, but practically invisible to anyone conducting a review without knowing exactly where to look. It was elegant in a horrible way. The kind of deception that worked precisely because it didn't destroy evidence, it just hid it in plain sight, inside a system that was too large and too trusted for anyone to question. Ronald Greaves had not deleted Marcus Hayes's reports. He had simply made sure they would never be found. Victoria sat with this knowledge in the parking garage of the company she had built. She thought about Marcus's voice in the conference room. "You are about to destroy the wrong man, and one day you will know it." She had known it for approximately 40 minutes. She started her car. She had a great deal of work to do. Back in the small coastal town, Marcus was washing the last of the baking pans with the radio on low, the bakery dark, except for the kitchen lights. Lily's school drawings taped to the wall beside the prep station because she had asked to put them there, and Marcus had said yes. He thought about what Cecilia had said, the biggest weakness or the biggest gift. He thought about the permit audit and the FOIA response, and Ronald Greaves and Victoria Sterling standing at his counter and saying, "I think I made a mistake," with the particular weight of someone who meant, and wasn't sure what to do with the meaning yet. He dried his hands on a clean towel. He turned off the kitchen lights. He locked back door and walked to his car. It was a quiet night, the kind this town specialized in, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of things resting, preparing for tomorrow. The harbor 2 miles away moving with its own slow rhythm. The closed shops on the block casting clean lines of shadow. The corner where his bakery sat. The faded Rosalie's sign now lit by a small outdoor light Marcus had installed. The painted bread loaves and little flowers visible if you looked for them. He sat in his car for a moment. He thought about Rosalie, who had started something in 1987 and believed in it for decades, and left behind 52 YouTube videos, and a recipe for peach cobbler, and a building that a town still missed 3 years after she was gone. Some things are worth saving. He started the car. He went home to his daughter. And somewhere in Charlotte, Victoria Sterling was reading file after file after file, and understanding, piece by piece, the full shape of what had been done, and what she had failed to prevent, and what she was going to have to do about it. The question of whether she would do it in time, and what it would cost her when she did, was still an open one. But she was reading. And that, Marcus would later think, was where it actually started. Not in the conference room. Not in the bakery. In a parking garage on a Tuesday night, with a woman who had spent 11 years trusting a system she'd built. Finally reading the thing she should have read a year ago. Some beginnings look like endings for a long time, before you can see what they actually are. The files took Victoria 3 days to get through completely. Not because there were so many of them, though there were, but because reading them required a different kind of attention than she was accustomed to applying to documents. She was fast with numbers, fast with contracts, with compliance briefs, with the dense regulatory language that most executives handed off to their legal teams. She had built a career on the ability to process information quickly and make decisions that held up under pressure. But these files required her to be slow, because every time she moved through them quickly, she started to process them the way an executive processes information, looking for the operational implication, the next step, the corrective action, and that was not what the files needed. What they needed was for her to sit with them, to understand not just what had happened, but what it had meant. The third report Marcus filed, the one from April, 12 weeks before the product recall, was 41 pages long. He had documented every deviation from safety standards he'd observed in the product line's 7 manufacturing process, with timestamps, photographic evidence references, supplier correspondence, and a risk projection model he had built himself on a Saturday because it was the only day he had uninterrupted time, and the problem was serious enough that it couldn't wait for a scheduled review window. The report concluded with a paragraph Victoria read 4 times. Marcus had written, "If these deviations are not addressed before the next production run, there is a high probability of a contamination event that will require a Level 2 recall. I am formally recommending a production halt and an independent quality audit. I am filing this report simultaneously to operations, to the office of the CEO, and retaining a copy in my personal records. I am requesting written acknowledgement of receipt." He had requested written acknowledgement of receipt. The acknowledgement he received, she found it 3 files later, was a 2-line email from Ronald Greaves's assistant. "Thank you for your report. It has been received and will be reviewed in the appropriate channel." Then nothing. Nothing for 12 weeks until the recall happened. And then the next communication Marcus Hayes received from leadership was the meeting invitation to the conference room on the 14th floor. Victoria set the files down and sat at her kitchen table. Not her office. She had driven home at 9 p.m. to read the rest of them in a space that was hers rather than the company's, and pressed her hands half flat against the table and breathed. She had a system in this company. She had built it piece by piece, and she had trusted it the way you trust something you made yourself, with the specific confidence of the creator who knows every component. And somewhere inside that system, someone had taken a 41-page report from a man trying to protect the company's integrity, and buried it so cleanly that when the crisis came, the same man became the explanation rather than the solution. She had trusted the system. She had not verified it. There was a difference, and she was living inside that difference right now, at 10:45 at night, with cold coffee and 41 pages that should have ended differently. She called her general counsel at 11 the next morning. His name was Paul, and he had been with the company for 7 years, and Victoria had chosen him to be one of the rare lawyers because he was one of the rare lawyers who seemed to understand that legal and right were related concepts rather than competing ones. "I need to reopen the Hayes investigation," she said, when he picked up. A pause. Victoria independently, not through operations, not through any channel Ronald Greaves has touched. "I need someone outside the company to go through the product line's 7 records and give me an honest assessment of who knew what and when." Another pause, longer. "This is going to attract attention. I know, from the board, from investors who are watching the stock after the recall settlement. I know, Paul, if the investigation finds what I think you're suggesting it might find, it will find it. I've already read the files." She looked at the stack on her kitchen table. "I need this done correctly, thoroughly. and I need it documented in a way that will hold up to any subsequent scrutiny." Paul was quiet for a moment. She could hear him thinking the way he thought, carefully, methodically, already several steps ahead in the process. "Who else knows about the files?" "Ronald gave them to me." "He knows I have them. Has he done anything with that information? Made any moves?" Victoria had considered this. "I've had IT flag his account for unusual activity. So far nothing, but I want to move quickly." "How quickly?" "I want the external investigator engaged by end of week. I'll start making calls this afternoon, Paul." She paused. "I want the scope to include the permit audit on the Hayes Bakery. Pemberton Compliance Associates. I want to know if that was authorized through any legitimate channel, or if it was a personal decision by someone acting without authority." A longer silence this time. "Victoria, if that connects back to Greaves." "Then it connects back to Greaves. Document it." She hung up and stood at her kitchen window for a moment. Then she picked up her keys and drove to work and spent the next 6 hours being the CEO of Sterling Foods in every way that was required of her 3 meetings, a call with a major retailer, a quarterly review that she moved through with the specific professional composure she had perfected over decades. She answered questions, made decisions, kept things moving. She did not mention the investigation to anyone. Not yet. The investigation was going to require the right moment, and the right moment had not arrived. 70 miles away, Marcus was having a different kind of morning. The FOIA response had been sitting on his kitchen table for 3 days, while he'd been too busy with the bakery's preparation for a weekend community event, a farmers market partnership he'd arranged with a local agricultural co-op, the biggest thing he'd taken on since opening, and he hadn't had the bandwidth to think about it fully until now. He sat across the table from Cecilia, who had arrived early and who had clearly already read the document in the 40 seconds between Marcus setting it down and pouring the coffee. "Pemberton," Cecilia said. "Yeah. And you've confirmed Sterling Foods uses them. They're on the approved vendor list, publicly available." Cecilia turned the document in her hands. "That could be coincidence." "It could be. But you don't think it is, do you?" She set the document down. She looked at it. She looked at Marcus. "No, I don't. He drank his coffee. She said she didn't authorize it. And you believe her?" "I believe she didn't know. I think someone in that company decided to take a run at me on their own." "Which means," Cecilia said slowly, "that someone in that company still wants to keep you quiet." The word quiet sat between them. Marcus had been thinking about this for 3 days. In the margins of his thinking about bread and flour, and the farmer's market, and Lily's upcoming play, where she was playing the role of a distinguished scientist, which she had decided meant she needed glasses, even though her vision was perfect. He had been thinking about the shape of what was happening and what it meant. Someone at Sterling Foods had tried to bury his reports before the recall. That same person, or someone protecting that person, had tried to slow his bakery down after Victoria appeared. The connection was clear enough. The motive was clear enough. What was less clear was what to do with it. He could take the FOIA document to a lawyer. He had spoken to one already, a woman in Charlotte, who had reviewed his termination and told him his case was strong on paper but difficult in practice because the buried reports were inside Sterling Foods' system, and accessing them for litigation would be long and expensive and uncertain. He could go public. He had been approached twice by local journalists after the permit audit story moved through the community. Both times he had declined because putting this story in front of a camera felt like choosing a fire that he couldn't control and that might burn things he needed to protect. Or he could wait and see what Victoria Sterling actually did, which felt, honestly, like the most uncomfortable option. Because it required him to trust someone who had proven she could fail him, on the possibility that she had learned something from failing him. Marcus was not a man who trusted easily. Not since Keisha died, and he learned that the most fundamental certainties could evaporate without warning. Not since the conference room. Not since the months of rejection letters, and the whisper campaign, and the permit audit. But he was also not a man who let the damage someone else had done to him determine every decision he made afterward. He had made that commitment to himself in the parking lot, the morning they handed him a box and deactivated his keycard. He was going to be the same man he had always been, careful, honest, willing to see people clearly, or he was going to become someone else. and becoming someone else was not an option he had given himself. "I'm going to wait a little longer," Marcus said. Cecilia looked at him. "How long?" "I'll know when I know." She accepted this the way she accepted most things Marcus said about timing, with a measured trust that she had earned the right to extend, because she'd watched him be right about timing before. "Okay," she said. "Then let's talk about the farmer's market. Because we need twice as many peach cobblers as we originally planned, and I need you to call the Hatcher farm today about the peaches." Marcus called the Hatcher farm. The farmer's market weekend was the largest thing that had happened to Rosalie's bakery since it opened. It wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be a modest partnership. Marcus's baked goods, alongside 4 local farms and a honey producer, a Saturday morning event that the community co-op had been trying to formalize for 2 years. But word had traveled, the way word traveled in this town now, and by 8:30 on Saturday morning there was a line outside the bakery that wrapped halfway around the block, and people were coming from 3 counties. Lily was there, stationed at a small table Marcus had set up outside, where she was selling the handwritten recipe card she'd made, not Rosalie's actual recipes, but Lily's own summaries of them, illustrated with her careful drawings of bread loaves and peaches, and a small figure that was probably meant to be Marcus, but looked more like a friendly bear wearing an apron. A man bought 5 of them. "What are these for?" Lily asked him. "My grandkids. They cook with me on Sundays. You should try the peach cobbler," Lily said with the sales confidence of someone who had absolute faith in her product. "My dad makes it. It's really good. Rosalie taught him." "Who's Rosalie?" Lily pointed at the photograph in the window. "She started this bakery in 1987. She's not here anymore, but her recipes are." The man looked at the photograph. Then, he bought a peach cobbler. Marcus watched this exchange from behind the counter while simultaneously managing a line that had not shortened in 90 minutes. And he felt something he recognized as happiness. The real undramatic kind, not the peak of something, but the sustained hum of a thing, working the way it was meant to work. Cecilia appeared beside him. "We're out of cinnamon rolls." "Already?" "By 9:20. I've got a second batch in the back oven, but it's 40 minutes out." "Tell people 40 minutes. I did. 6 of them said they'd wait." "Of course they did." She disappeared back into the kitchen. Darnell was running the register with the focused intensity of someone who had decided this was his moment and was rising to it. Marcus packed bags and answered questions and shook hands and talked to a couple from 2 counties over who'd heard about the bakery from their daughter, and a retired teacher who said she'd known Rosalie personally and had come to see what someone had done with the place. "What do you think?" Marcus asked her genuinely. The teacher looked around. She was in her 80s, and she looked at the photographs and the handwritten cards and the lily-drawn illustrations with the careful eyes of someone who had known the original and was comparing it honestly. "She would have liked you," the teacher said. "Rosalie didn't care about perfect. She cared about real." She looked at Marcus. "This is real." He thanked her. She bought 2 loaves and a box of biscuits, and she told Lily, on the way out, that her drawings were excellent, which Lily accepted with the gracious seriousness of someone who had been told an important and accurate fact. That evening, after the market was over, and the last customer had gone, and the cleanup was done, and Cecilia had left, and Darnell had gone home, and Lily was asleep in the back office on the small couch Marcus had put there for exactly this kind of long day, Marcus sat on the front steps of the bakery. He had his phone in his hand. He had a message from an unknown number that had arrived at 2:15 that afternoon, during the peak of the market rush, which he hadn't seen until now. The message said, "This is Victoria Sterling. I'm using a personal number. I need to speak with you about something important. Not by phone, in person. If you're willing, I'll come to you." Marcus read it twice. He thought about what Cecilia had said. Your biggest weakness or your biggest gift. He typed back Tuesday. 7 a.m. before we open. The reply came in 40 seconds. "I'll be there." He put his phone in his pocket. He went inside and checked on Lily, who was sleeping with her arms around a throw pillow and her notebook tucked beside her, and he pulled the light blanket over her and sat in the chair beside the couch. For a few minutes, just watching her breathe, the way he had been watching her breathe since she was 3 days old, and he'd understood for the first time in his life what it meant to be terrified of losing something. He had not lost her. He had not lost this. Whatever was coming on Tuesday, he had not lost this. Victoria arrived at 6:50. Marcus saw her car through the bakery window while he was setting up the front case. He let her wait until 7, not to punish her, because he needed the 10 minutes to finish what he was doing, and because some part of him felt that the ability to set the pace of his own morning in his own bakery was not a small thing. He unlocked the door at exactly 7. Victoria came in. She was not in a corporate coat today. She was wearing what looked like regular clothes, dark pants, a simple jacket. She looked like herself without the armor. Marcus noted it without attaching too much to it. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please." He poured 2 cups. He came around the counter and sat at one of the tables and gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. They both drank their coffee. Then Victoria set a folder on the table. Not a corporate portfolio with the Sterling Foods logo. A plain manila folder, the kind you buy at an office supply store. "I've retained an external investigator," she said. "Independent of the company. She's going through the complete product line 7 record, everything from initial production planning through the recall." Marcus looked at the folder, and she's been working for 2 weeks. She's given me an interim report. Victoria's hands were flat on the table beside the folder. "I'm going to tell you what's in it, and then I'm going to give you a copy. Because you have a right to this information." Marcus looked at her. "Tell me." Victoria took a breath. "Your reports were received. All 3. They were logged in the correct system. They were not lost. They were not missed. They were not overlooked." She paused. "They were deliberately classified in a way that excluded them from the review committee's primary file. Someone who understood the document management system used its own architecture against it, buried your reports in a subfolder of a subfolder in a way that was technically compliant with records retention but practically invisible to a review that wasn't looking for them specifically." Marcus did not move. He felt the information landing on him the way cold water lands a full-body shock that was also, in a strange way, a relief. Because he had known. He had always known that the reports existed, and that they had been received, and the gap between knowing and being able to prove had been the space he had been living in for nearly a year. "Ronald Greaves," Marcus said. "The investigator has documented a pattern of records management that points to his account and his authorized access. We're still building the full picture." Victoria looked at him. "But yes, Ronald, why? Product Line 7 was his initiative. He had championed it to the board. A halt would have delayed the launch and exposed decisions he'd made about timelines that he'd been less than transparent about." She paused. "When the recall happened anyway, he needed the problem to belong to someone else. Your reports were the evidence that the problem had been identified correctly and suppressed. So he suppressed them differently." Marcus breathed in slowly. He had spent almost a year carrying the specific exhaustion of a man who is telling the truth and cannot make anyone believe it. Not the big dramatic exhaustion of someone fighting a public battle. The quiet, grinding kind, the weight of knowing, and not being able to move the knowing from yourself into the world where it could do anything. "The permit audit," Marcus said, "also documented. Greaves contracted Pemberton compliance without authorization. He used a budget channel that he controlled, and that doesn't go through standard procurement review. The investigator found the authorization trail." Victoria looked at him steadily. He was trying to buy time. If the bakery was tied up in compliance issues, you'd have less bandwidth to look into what happened at Sterling Foods. Or that was the thinking. "It was the thinking," Marcus said. "It almost worked, I know." A silence moved through the bakery. Outside, the street was beginning to move with its morning rhythm, the first cars. A couple of people walking. A delivery truck making its rounds. "What are you going to do with this?" Marcus asked. "I'm presenting the full investigation to the board next Thursday. I'm recommending Ronald's immediate termination, with cause. I'm recommending a formal statement clearing your name with whatever public and industry-facing components you want, or need to address the professional impact." She paused. "I'm also recommending that we examine our entire document management system to understand how this kind of manipulation was possible and close those gaps. And your board is going to go along with this. My board is going to have significant concerns." Her voice was measured but direct. "This creates legal exposure. It creates regulatory scrutiny. Several board members are going to argue that the settlement of the original recall already closed the liability on this, and that reopening it is unnecessary risk. But I'm the CEO, and I've made the decision that this is what we're doing. Marcus studied her. Why? She looked at him. Because it's the right thing. People know that and don't do it. Yes, so why are you? Victoria was quiet for a moment, not formulating, accessing something honest. He watched it happen and he recognized it because he had been doing the same thing himself for months, the process of going past the comfortable version of something and finding the true one. Because I read your report, she said, the April one. All 41 pages. And I thought about the Saturday you spent building that risk projection model, because the problem was too serious to wait for a regular review window. She looked at him. And I thought about what kind of man does that. What kind of employee cares that much about getting it right? And I thought about what I did with that man. Silence. And then I thought about your daughter, selling recipe cards outside your bakery, she continued. I drove by on Saturday. I saw her. She stopped. I didn't stop. I just drove by. Marcus looked at his coffee cup. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Victoria said. I know that's not something I can ask. I'm here because I thought you deserved to know what I found before I take it to the board. Because you've been living with this for a year, and you should know it first. The sentence landed differently than she probably expected it to. Because Marcus knew, sitting across from her in his bakery in the early morning, quiet, that being told, first being made the priority, rather than the afterthought, was something he had not experienced once in the entire history of his relationship with this woman or this company, and the simplicity of it moved through him in a way he hadn't prepared for. He did not let it show on his face. Not fully. What do you need from me? He asked. Nothing. This investigation doesn't require your participation to proceed. She paused. But if you're willing to share your own records, the copies you retained of your original reports, it would strengthen the evidentiary picture. I have them. I thought you might. I kept everything. I know. The investigator noted that the document trail you kept privately is more comprehensive than what we have internally. Something moved across Victoria's face that might have been in a different context. Admiration. You documented everything. Because I knew something was wrong. Yes, I knew it, and no one listened. No, they didn't. Marcus looked at the folder on the table. He thought about the 41-page report, and the 2-line acknowledgement email, and the 12 weeks, and the conference room, and the cardboard box, and Lily's crayon drawing in the passenger seat. I'll give you my copies, Marcus said. Victoria released a breath. Thank you. I'm not doing it for the company, Marcus said clearly. I'm doing it because my name is still being used as the explanation for something I tried to prevent. And I want that corrected, not as a favor, as a fact. Understood. What happens to Ronald? Termination with cause. Depending on what the full investigation shows, potentially a referral to the appropriate authorities. The permit audit, in particular using company resources to interfere with a private citizen's business that has legal dimensions outside the company's disciplinary process. Marcus nodded. He thought about Ronald Greaves, who he had never liked, and who he had spent 8 years working around, navigating the specific bureaucratic self-protection of a man who was smart enough to survive, but not good enough to lead. He had known there was something there. He had not known the full shape of it. He was learning that there was often a large gap between the something and the shape. I have one condition, Marcus said. Victoria looked at him. The public statement, the one clearing my name, I want to review it before it goes out. I want to see the language, not to change what it says factually, but because I've watched what happens when a company manages a message, and I want to make sure this one says what it means. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. That's fair. And I want it to go to every industry contact who received the version of events that blamed me. The food safety networks, the recruitment contacts, the trade publications that covered the recall. If there's a whisper campaign that did damage, the correction needs to reach the same channels. I'll make sure of it. That's not a small thing, Victoria. That's actual work, I know. She met his eyes. I'll do the work. He believed her. He wasn't sure exactly when he had started believing her, some between the parking garage and this table, somewhere in the process of watching her choose to keep pulling the thread, even when it was getting harder and the picture it was revealing was not a comfortable one. But he believed her now. He picked up the folder. He opened it. He read the first page of the interim investigation report, then the second, then the third, which covered the April report. In detail, his report, his 41 pages, the Saturday morning work, and he read the investigator's language describing it as a comprehensive and professionally meticulous document that represented best practice quality management, and he sat with that for a moment. Professionally meticulous. He had done his job. He had done it correctly. He had done it on a Saturday when he didn't have to, because he understood that some things couldn't wait. And it had been buried, and now someone was unburying it. He closed the folder. "When do you go to the board?" Marcus asked. "Thursday. What's the risk to you?" She paused. It was a question she hadn't expected from him, and he saw that in her expression. Significant. "There are board members who will argue that I created unnecessary exposure by opening this, that I should have managed it quietly. Will they try to remove you?" "They might try." "And?" Victoria Sterling looked at him with an expression that was several things at once resolved, and tired and clear in the way that things become clear when someone has finally stopped trying to manage two different versions of the truth. "And I'm going to tell them what I found. All of it. Because a company is not measured by how it handles success. It is measured by what it does when the wrong thing was done, and someone has to stand up and say so." Marcus looked at her. "You know," he said, "if you'd said something like that in that conference room a year ago, none of this would have happened. I know you believed in results over people. I did. And now?" She looked around the bakery, at the photographs, at the handwritten cards, at the drawings, at the space Marcus had rebuilt from rot and cracked windows into something that 200 people had stood in line for on a Saturday morning. "Now I'm trying to learn the difference," she said. Marcus stood up. He collected his copies. He went to the back office and spent 15 minutes making copies of copies. The complete record he had maintained in a fireproof box under his desk because he had never stopped believing that one day the truth would need to be provable. He brought the stack out and set it on the table in front of Victoria. She looked at it, the weight of it, the thickness. "You kept all of this, every page." She put her hand on the stack almost involuntarily. Then she picked it up. "I'm going to make sure this counts for something." "Make sure it counts for the right thing," Marcus said. "Not for the company's benefit, for the record. There's a difference." "I know there is." She stood. She picked up both the folder and Marcus's documents. She started toward the door. "Victoria." She stopped and turned. "Your board meeting on Thursday," Marcus said. "Whatever happens, whether they support you or push back, you need to finish what you started. Not because it helps me, because leaving something like this half done is worse than not starting it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to finish it." He believed that too. She left. Cecilia arrived 12 minutes later and found Marcus behind the counter, prepping the morning case with the focused efficiency she recognized as his method for processing something without talking about it yet. She put on her apron. She went to the back. She came back out 5 minutes later with the bread trays. She set them up beside him, and they worked in silence for a few minutes. Then she came. "Yeah, and?" Marcus set down the pastry tongs. He turned and looked at Cecilia, who looked back at him with the patience of someone who had been watching people tell their own truths for 3 decades. "She found it," Marcus said. "All of it. The reports, the buried documentation, the permit audit. She's taking it to her board Thursday." Cecilia was quiet for a moment. "And you gave her your copies?" "Yeah, that was hard." "Yeah," she nodded. She picked up the pastry tongs he'd set down. She continued, setting up the case. "So, what do you feel?" Marcus thought about this honestly. He thought about the 41-page report and the woman who finally read it. He thought about his name, attached to a failure that wasn't his fault, and the possibility that the attachment might finally be dissolved. He thought about Lily, asleep on the couch on Saturday night, with her notebook beside her. "Like something's been moving toward me for a long time," he said, "and I don't know yet if it's going to help me or hit me." Cecilia looked at him. "Usually it's both." "Yeah," Marcus said. "Usually it's both." He went to the front door and unlocked it. He flipped the sign to open. The first customer was a man he recognized, came in every Tuesday and Thursday, ordered 2 croissants and black coffee, always took the table by the window, and read a physical newspaper. He was in his 70s. His name was Earl. Earl walked in, glanced at Marcus, and said, "You look like you've had a morning." I have good kind or bad kind. Marcus considered this for a moment. The kind you need, he said. Earl nodded, accepting this as a complete answer. 2 croissants and black coffee. I know, Earl. Just making sure. Marcus made the coffee. He plated the croissants. He brought them to the table by the window. Somewhere in Charlotte, Victoria Sterling was sitting at her desk, reading through a stack of documents that belonged to a man she had failed, preparing to walk into a room of people who would tell her she was making a mistake, and choosing to do it anyway. And in the bakery, Marcus Hayes was serving his 3rd customer of the morning when his phone buzzed with a message from a number he'd recently added to his contacts. The board meeting is confirmed for Thursday at 2. Thank you for the documents. The documents. I want you to know whatever happens in that room, I'm going to tell the truth. Marcus read it. He typed back, I know. He put his phone in his apron pocket. He served his 4th customer of the morning. The bread in the back oven was almost ready. He could smell it reaching that point, the particular moment when the crust was setting and the interior was finishing its work, that precise threshold between almost done and done, which you could only learn to recognize by being present for it over and over until your body knew it before your mind did. He went to check on the bread. He was not thinking about Thursday. He was thinking about bread. But Thursday was coming anyway, the way things come when they have been set in motion by the decision of someone who has finally decided that the cost of telling the truth is lower than the cost of living with having told a lie. And Marcus Hayes, who had been waiting for the truth for nearly a year, was ready for whatever it cost when it arrived. Thursday arrived the way consequential days tend to arrive, without fanfare, without warning in the weather or the light. Just an ordinary morning that happened to contain something that would change the shape of what came after it. Victoria Sterling was in her office at 6:15 a.m. She had been there since 5:40, which was earlier than even she usually arrived. And she had spent the first 40 minutes not reviewing documents she had reviewed. Everything there was to review. Had been reviewing it in pieces and in whole for 2 weeks, but sitting with her coffee and the specific quality of early morning silence that exists in an office building before the building becomes what it pretends to be during business hours. She had 3 hours before the board meeting. Paul had sent her a message the night before. I've reviewed everything. The case is solid. Be prepared for Whitmore and Hendricks to push back hard. Whitmore in particular is going to argue liability exposure. Have your answer ready. Whitmore was the longest-serving board member. A man in his late 60s who had been on the Sterling Foods board since before Victoria took the CEO position, and who treated corporate governance the way some men treated poker, as a game in which information was a resource to be managed, not a responsibility to be honored. She had navigated him for 11 years. She understood exactly how his mind worked. He was going to argue that the original recall settlement had closed the legal chapter on product line 7 until then, that reopening the investigation created new exposure without proportionate benefit, that the right course of action was to handle the Ronald Greaves situation internally and quietly, and to leave Marcus Hayes's reputation to be repaired by time and industry amnesia rather than formal corporate action. He was going to make that argument clearly, and it was going to sound reasonable, and 3 of the other board members were going to find it compelling, because it was, from a pure liability management standpoint, defensible. Victoria had her answer ready. She also had something else ready. Something she hadn't told Paul about, because Paul would have told her it was unnecessary, and she had decided that it was necessary. She had written a letter. Not a corporate communication. Not a formal statement, a letter. She had written it on a Thursday 2 weeks ago, revised it twice, and then left it alone for 10 days, and come back to it, and found that it still said what she meant, which was her test, for whether something was true or performed. The letter was addressed to Marcus Hayes. It was not going in the board presentation. It was not part of the official record. It was something she was going to give him after, if after went the way she intended to make it go. Because there were things that belonged inside the formal process, and things that belonged outside of it. And what she had written in the letter belonged to the second category. She was putting the letter in her coat pocket and thinking about nothing in particular when her phone rang. It was Ronald Greaves. She looked at the screen for 2 full rings before she answered. Ronald. Victoria. His voice was controlled, careful. The voice of a man who had been preparing what he was going to say, and had prepared too long so that everything sounded slightly rehearsed. I wanted to reach out before the board meeting today. Did you? I think it would be beneficial for both of us to discuss how to position this situation in a way that... Ronald, I'm going to stop you there. Her voice was even. Precise. There is no version of this conversation in which we work together to manage how the information is presented. I have the investigation findings. I have Marcus Hayes's documentation. I have the Pemberton authorization trail. I am presenting all of it to the board today, and what happens after that happens. A pause. You understand what this means for the company. I understand what it means. The stock response alone. Ronald. She cut through the word cleanly. I know what it means. I've considered all of it. My answer is the same. Another pause. Longer. She could hear him recalibrating, moving from the conversation he'd planned for to the one he was actually having. You're making a mistake, Ronald said. Maybe, Victoria said. But it's mine to make. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. She thought about Ronald Greaves in his office, with his hands on his papers, calculating options, the way he always calculated options, not ethically, not even strategically in the long term, but tactically, in the immediate. What can I say? What can I use? What position can I take that protects the next 5 minutes? She had worked alongside this man for 9 years. She had trusted his results. She thought about Marcus Hayes on a Saturday, building a risk projection model because the problem was too serious to wait. She put her phone in her pocket. She picked up her presentation folder and went to the boardroom. The Sterling Foods boardroom was on the 16th floor, 2 floors above the conference room, where Mark had placed his hands on the mahogany table and said the thing nobody else would say. Victoria had always found this floor different in quality from the rest of the building. Quieter, somehow, in a way that wasn't about sound but about the specific weight of decisions made in rooms like this one. Decisions that moved downward through an organization and became other people's realities. She was thinking about that as she arranged her documents at the head of the table. The board members filed in over the following 15 minutes. 8 of them total, plus Paul seated along the wall as general counsel. Whitmore came in second to last and looked at Victoria the way he always looked at her before a meeting he expected to be difficult, with the specifically calibrated neutrality of a man who had decided nothing yet, and wanted her to know he had decided nothing yet. She looked back. Let's get started, she said. She began with the facts. This was deliberate. She had considered beginning with context, with the human story of it, with Marcus Hayes and what had happened to him. But she had decided that for this room, for these people, facts first was the right architecture. Let them build the picture from data before they encountered the person inside the data. Let them understand what was done before they had to reckon with who it was done to. She walked them through the investigation findings in sequence. The 3 reports, the document management manipulation, the timeline from Marcus's filing to the recall to the termination meeting, the Pemberton audit trail, Ronald's account access records, and the authorization chain that led to him. She did not editorialize. She did not use emotional language. She presented it the way a quality manager presents a risk assessment, methodically, completely, with sourced evidence for every claim. When she finished the first section, the room was quiet. Whitmore spoke first. This is significant exposure, Victoria. I know. The original recall settlement addressed the consumer harm from the product failure. It did not address the corporate conduct that enabled the failure to occur, or the subsequent misrepresentation of that conduct. She held his gaze. These are distinct issues. The legal team is going to have serious concerns about reopening. Paul's team has reviewed the full investigation. Paul, she looked at him. Paul straightened slightly. The legal exposure from not acting on this information, now that it has been formally documented and reported to the board, is significantly higher than the exposure from addressing it directly. We are now on notice. How we respond to that notice becomes part of the record. Whitmore absorbed this. What's the proposed action? Victoria presented it cleanly. Termination of Ronald Greaves with cause, effective immediately. A formal statement clearing Marcus Hayes's name, distributed through the same industry and media channels that had received the original narrative of the termination. a comprehensive audit of the document management system, a formal letter of apology and compensation discussion with Marcus Hayes for wrongful termination. The room considered this, a board member named Sandra, who served on 2 other boards and who Victoria had always found to be the person in the room most interested in what was actually true, asked, "The wrongful termination piece, has Hayes indicated what he would want in terms of compensation?" "I haven't discussed it with him. I wanted to bring this to the board first. His primary stated concern has been the restoration of his professional reputation, which the industry-facing statement addresses directly." Victoria paused. "Whatever additional conversation happens with Mr. Hayes, I want it to be about what's right for him, not about managing our liability." Sandra nodded. Whitmore leaned forward. "Victoria, I want to be direct with you. This board is going to face significant scrutiny from our institutional investors over this. The timing, the optics, a black employee wrongfully terminated, and the truth buried this is going to become a story." "It already is a story," Victoria said. "The question is whether we're the company that told it honestly or the company it got told about." The words landed in the room with more weight than she had expected. She had not planned that sentence. It had arrived fully formed in the moment, the way true things sometimes did. Whitmore was quiet. Sandra looked at her with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering something. Another board member, Collins, who had been silent through the entire presentation, said, "What does it look like if we don't do this? Walk me through the actual scenario." Victoria looked at him. "If we don't address this formally, we terminate Greaves quietly, we manage Marcus Hayes with a private settlement under NDA, and we move on. For 12 to 18 months, that probably works. But the external investigator's full report goes into the record, and external investigators have their own professional obligations. The document management manipulation is independently verifiable by anyone who has access to the system. Marcus Hayes retained comprehensive personal documentation. This will not stay contained." She paused. "And in the moment it doesn't. We are not the company that did the right thing when it was hard. We are the company that tried to suppress the truth twice." The room was quiet for a long moment. Collins said, "I'll support the proposed action." Sandra said, "I'll support it." One by one, they went around the table. Whitmore was last. He looked at Victoria for a long moment. He was calculating. She watched do it. The rapid assessment of positions and consequences that she had watched him perform in dozens of board meetings over 11 years. He was not a man of principle in the way she was trying to be one, but he was a man of pragmatism, and pragmatism could, if the math was right, arrive at the same destination. The statement, Whitmore said, "It needs to be precise, legally reviewed at every line. No admissions beyond what the investigation supports." Agreed. And Hayes gets to review it. He gets to review it. He doesn't write it, but he reviews it, and we address his concerns. Whitmore nodded slowly. "All right, I'll support it." Victoria thanked the board. She closed the meeting. She walked Paul to the elevator, and they stood there for a moment, both of them understanding what had just happened, without needing to say it. "That was harder than I expected," Paul said. "It was easier than it should have been." Paul looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means we almost didn't do this at all. It means if Ronald had been slightly more careful, we wouldn't have the document trail. It means the right thing happened today because someone was sloppy in how they buried it, not because we had good systems for finding it." She pressed the elevator button. "That's what I have to fix." Paul was quiet for a moment. "Then you know Whitmore's going to watch every step of this, very carefully." "I know, if anything in the execution is handled poorly." "I know, Paul." She looked at him. "It won't be." She went back to her office. She called the external investigator and told her the board had approved the full process. She called HR and told them Ronald Greaves's termination papers needed to be ready by end of day. She called the communications team and told them she needed a meeting first thing Friday to begin drafting the public statement. Then she sat at her desk and sent a single text to Marcus Hayes. The board approved everything, all of it. "I'll call you this afternoon with details if that works." She watched the screen. The reply came in 4 minutes. "It works." She put her phone down. She thought about what she felt in that moment, and what she felt was complicated in a way that was probably appropriate. Relief, yes, but relief was too simple a word. It was more like the sensation of having been carrying something at a slight angle for a long time, long enough that the angle felt normal, and having it finally set down straight. She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. In the pocket, she could feel the weight of the letter. She left it there, for now. In the bakery, Marcus had spent Thursday morning the way he had spent every Thursday morning since November, making the weekly batch of Rosalie's dinner rolls, which had become the item his regular customers planned their Thursday around the way. People plan around appointments. He did not check his phone while his hands were in the dough. This was a rule he had made for himself, not because the dough required it, though it did require attention, but because he had found that the hour he spent with his hands working was the hour his mind processed things most clearly, without the interference of information and response. He had told Cecilia about the board meeting at 7 that morning. Just the fact of it, Victoria was going in. It was happening today. Cecilia had nodded and said nothing, which was her method of communicating that she understood the significance and intended to let him carry it his own way. Lily had asked, at breakfast, why her father looked like he was thinking about 17 things. "I'm only thinking about 3. "What 3? "The board meeting at Sterling Foods today. The dinner rolls. And whether we have enough peaches coming from Hatcher for next weekend." Lily processed this. "The board meeting is about what happened to you at your old job." "Yes. And they're deciding if they're going to tell the truth?" Marcus looked at her. He was consistently surprised by the directness of the thing she went for the precise center of a situation, without the preamble adults wrapped around it. "Yes," he said. "That's essentially it." Lily was quiet for a moment, eating her toast with the focused attention brought to food she enjoyed. "Then, what happens if they don't? Then I keep doing what I'm doing, and I find another way to make it right. But it takes longer. Yes, it takes longer." She chewed her toast. "I hope they tell the truth. Me too, baby. Not just for you," Lily said. "For them. Because it's bad to carry a lie. My teacher says it gets heavier the longer you have it." Marcus looked at his daughter. "Your teacher is right," he said. He took her to school. He came back. He made the dinner rolls. "That's all it takes. I dare you." He opened the bakery and moved through the morning with the particular quality of focus present. Over months of doing this, the ability to be fully in the work while holding something else in the background, and Brooke not ignoring it, but not letting it take the day from him either. When his phone buzzed at 11:20 with Victoria's text, he was in the middle of explaining to a first-time customer the difference between the French toast loaf and the brioche. And he finished the explanation first and rang up the purchase and thanked the customer before he stepped back and read the message. The board approved everything. All of it. He read it twice. He put the phone back in his apron pocket. He went to the back and stood in the kitchen for approximately 90 seconds. Then Darnell called from the front. "Marcus, the cinnamon rolls just sold out. There's a second tray in 20 minutes. Should I tell them?" "Tell them 20 minutes. He went back to the counter. He worked until 2. He replied to Victoria's text at 2:15, when the last customer had gone and Cecilia was closing out the register, and Darnell was wiping tables, and the bakery had the settled. Quiet quality it got in the late afternoon, all the work done, the residue of the day warm and present. "It works." Victoria called at 4 o'clock. She was in her car. He could hear it in the quality of the silence around her voice, the particular contained acoustic of someone in a moving vehicle. She walked him through the board meeting in detail, the vote, the specifics of what had been approved, the timeline for each action. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The public statement. When do I see it?" "Draft will be ready Monday. I'll send it to you directly before it goes to legal. And it goes to the industry channels, the food safety networks, the trade press, not just a press release that gets buried. Our communications team has a distribution list that specifically targets the channels that covered the original recall and your termination. The statement goes there first." "Okay." A pause. "Marcus." Her voice shifted slightly, not softer but differently calibrated, like someone stepping from one room into another. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly." "I usually do, I know you do. That's why I'm asking." A brief pause. "Are you okay? Not the bakery, not the statement, not the legal situation. You. Are you okay?" The question arrived in a place he hadn't been expecting it, and felt the specific discomfort of someone who has organized themselves so completely around forward motion that stillness feels dangerous. He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window that looked out on the corner she had once wanted to develop, the corner where Rosalie's bakery now stood with its soft outdoor light, and its faded sign, and its paintings of bread, loaves, and little flowers. "I'm better than I was," he said finally. "I'm not the same as I was before all of this. I don't think I will be. Is that it's not bad? It's just different." He looked at the corner. "I know things I didn't know before. About what matters. About what I can build. About what people are capable of, the bad version and the better version." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to be in town on Saturday. There's a property matter to finalize with the development team. We've moved the project to a different site. I should have told you that officially. The corner is off the table." "Okay. I was wondering." She stopped. Started again. "I was going to stop by the bakery. If that's all right. The bakery's open until 2. "I know. I'll come in the morning. We'll have cinnamon rolls," Marcus said. A pause. Then, and he was surprised by this, a small sound that might have been a laugh not performed, not managed, just a genuine brief thing. "Good. I've been thinking about those cinnamon rolls since the farmer's market. You should have stopped. I know. Lily would have sold you a recipe card. I saw her. She was very serious about those recipe cards. She's very serious about everything. She's like you." The sentence landed between them simply and without complication, and Marcus found he didn't have anything to add to it. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday." She hung up. Marcus stood at the window for another moment. Then he turned around and found Cecilia standing at the entrance to the kitchen, with her apron folded over her arm and her keys in her hand, watching him with the expression she had for things she had already understood mirrored. "Good news," she said. "All of it. Board approved everything." She nodded. Slowly. The nod of someone receiving information that is not a surprise, but still requires a moment to settle into its full meaning. "And Ronald Greaves," she said, "terminated today." "Good." She said it without drama, without satisfaction, just a clean factual response to a just outcome. "Then, are you going to celebrate?" Marcus thought about this. "I'm going to make Lily's favorite dinner and tell her the news, and probably watch whatever she wants to watch on television and be in bed by 9:30. Cecilia smiled. It was the real kind, the kind she didn't produce often. "That sounds exactly right." She left. Marcus locked the bakery. He picked up Lily from school. She got in the car and immediately said, "What happened?" "You have the face." "What face?" "The face where something happened and you're deciding how to tell me." He pulled out of the school parking lot. "The board meeting. They voted to tell the truth." Lily absorbed this. "About what happened to you at your old job." "Yes. They're making a statement that says I did my job right, and the person who said I didn't was lying." Lily looked out the window. She was quiet for a moment, and Marcus recognized this silence. It was the same silence she used when she was genuinely processing something, not performing consideration, but actually thinking. "Does that fix everything?" she said. "Not everything. It fixes my name, the professional part, the part that follows me around when people look me up or ask about me in the industry. But it doesn't fix what it felt like." Marcus glanced at her. "No, baby, it doesn't fix what it felt like, but it's still important." "It is." She turned back from the window and looked at him with Keisha's eyes, that direct, clear look that landed on the true thing, without circling it. "I'm glad, Daddy. Me too. Can we have peach cobbler tonight? I was going to make your actual favorite dinner." "Peach cobbler is my favorite dinner." "Peach cobbler is a dessert." "Then make it for dinner and also dessert." Marcus laughed. "The real kind." "Okay," he said. "Yeah, peach cobbler for dinner." They drove home with the windows down because Lily liked the air, and Marcus thought about Rosalie's YouTube videos and the 41-page report, and a conference room in Charlotte, and this car, a different car than the one he'd been driving then. But the same man behind the wheel, mostly, except for the ways that mattered, except for the things he now knew that he hadn't known before. He thought about Saturday. He thought about what it meant for Victoria Sterling to walk into his bakery, not with a portfolio of corporate documents or a permit audit concealed inside a compliance firm, but as a person. Just a person, standing in line, in the morning, in a place she had once tried to acquire, and had instead, in some way he was still working out, been changed by. He wasn't ready to call it forgiveness. He wasn't sure. Forgiveness was the right word for what he was moving toward. It seemed too clean, too final, too much like a thing that happened at a specific moment, rather than a process you moved through over time, adjusting as you went. What he was moving toward was something else, an understanding maybe, a recognition of what people were capable of when they finally stopped choosing the easier version of themselves and started choosing the harder, truer one. He had done it himself every morning since November. Every time he chose to show up to the bakery and do the work rather than sit with what had been done to him. He had chosen the harder, truer version of himself again and again until it stopped being a choice and started being who he was. He wasn't sure yet what Victoria Sterling was choosing, but she was choosing something. He could see that. The peach cobbler took 45 minutes, and Lily helped him with it, the way she'd helped him the first time, with Rosalie's YouTube video playing on the tablet, propped against the kitchen backsplash. Except this time, neither of them needed to watch it because they both knew the steps by heart, and they moved through the process together with the easy rhythm of two people who have done something together enough times that they don't need to coordinate, they just do. Lily put the cobbler in the oven and set the timer. Then she sat at the kitchen table and opened Rosalie's book to a new page. "What are you writing?" Marcus asked. "I'm adding something to the list of reasons she can't have our bakery." Marcus looked at her. "That's not really relevant anymore." "I know, but I want to add it anyway. What is it?" Lily wrote carefully, her best handwriting, the kind she used when something was important. Then she turned the notebook around so Marcus could read it. He read it. Number 4 said, "Because my dad built it when everything was broken, and things you build like that don't belong to anyone but the people who needed them." Marcus sat down at the table across from his daughter. He sat there for a moment with the particular full-chest feeling that he had no name for not happiness exactly, not relief exactly, something larger than both, that included both, and had no single word in any language he knew. "You know what, Lily? What? You're right." She nodded, accepting this as accurate, and turned the notebook back to herself and drew a small peach cobbler at the bottom of the entry, with steam rising from it in careful little curls. The timer went off. Marcus got up and checked on the cobbler. It was ready. He brought it to the table and served them both, and they sat at the kitchen table, with the windows open to the early evening, and Lily ate with the focused pleasure she brought to food she loved, and Marcus watched her and thought about tomorrow, and Saturday, and the slow particular work of what happened after the truth finally came out. The cobbler was perfect, it always was, when they made it together. Somewhere in Charlotte, Ronald Greaves was clearing his office. Somewhere on a highway heading south, Victoria Sterling was driving home with a letter in her coat pocket that she had not yet found the right moment to give. And in a kitchen above a bakery, a father and his daughter ate peach cobbler for dinner, and the evening settled around them with the quiet of a thing that had been worth the fight and was still, exactly and entirely, worth protecting. Saturday arrived. With the kind of morning this coastal better at most places clear and unhurried, the light coming in at an angle that made everything look like it had been placed deliberately, like someone had arranged the street and the storefronts and 2 miles out with the specific intention of making people feel that where they were was exactly where they were supposed to be. Marcus was inside the bakery at 5:15. He didn't need to be there that early. The morning prep could be done in 90 minutes, and they didn't open until 7:30. But he had been coming in at 5:15 since the first week, before the ovens were even properly working, when he'd sat on the floor of what would become the kitchen and eaten a gas station sandwich, and looked at the walls and believed, without any particular evidence, that this was going to become something. He kept coming at 5:15 because he had learned over the months that the extra time wasn't about the work, it was about the quiet. The 20 minutes before Cecilia arrived, before Darnell came in, before the first customer knocked on the door, before they'd even flipped the sign, those 20 minutes were his. The proof, every single morning, that he had built something that had a before. Something that existed before the customers and the revenue and the community around it. Something that was his in the most fundamental way, not because he owned it, but because he had made it from nothing, and it had made him into something in return. He was pulling the first tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven when he heard the knock. 6:50. Victoria was 10 minutes early. He set the tray on the cooling rack. He took off his oven mitts. He walked to the front and unlocked the door. She was standing there in a jacket and dark jeans. No portfolio, no leather case, nothing in her hands except a small paper bag from the coffee shop, 2 blocks over. She held it up slightly when he opened the door. "I didn't know if you'd have." She stopped, registered the smell, the warmth coming from the interior, the trays visible behind him. "Of course you have coffee." "I have coffee," Marcus said. "I brought you one anyway." He looked at the bag for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. She came in. She stood in the middle of the bakery, the way people stood in it when they were seeing it properly for the first time, not as a transaction point, not as real estate, not as the location of a business decision, but as a place. She turned slowly, not all the way, just enough to take in the photographs and the handwritten cards and the old wood floor that Marcus had stripped and finished, and the lily-drawn illustrations that had multiplied over the months and were now taped in small clusters at intervals around the room. She looked at the photograph of Rosalie. "Tell me about her," Victoria said. Marcus came around the counter. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot he'd made at 5:30 and set hers on the counter and kept his in his hand and looked at the photograph too. She opened this place in 1987. She was 41 years old. She had never run a business before. Her husband thought she was being impractical. He paused. She made it work for 30 years. The town felt her absence for 3 years after she was gone. That's the measure of it. Victoria looked at the photograph, at the white-haired woman in the flour-dusted apron, mid-explanation of something, one hand slightly raised, an expression on her face that was somewhere between patience and mischief. She looks like someone who didn't suffer nonsense. Lily says she looks like someone who would tell you the truth and then give you a cookie so you didn't feel bad about it. Victoria turned from the photograph. Something in her expression shifted, just a slight opening of something that was usually more controlled. "Your daughter says things like that? Constantly. I can't keep up with her. She was selling those recipe cards at the farmer's market. I watched her talk a man into buying 5 of them. He has grandkids who cook with him on Sundays." She knew that within 30 seconds of talking to him. She asked him about himself before she tried to sell him anything. Victoria looked at Marcus. She learned that from somewhere. Marcus drank his coffee and didn't answer. Victoria picked up her cup. She was quiet for a moment. Then she set it down and reached into her jacket pocket and brought out an envelope. Plain white, no Sterling Foods logo. His name on the front in her handwriting, not the efficient, slightly impersonal hand she used for professional notes, but something more careful, like she had been paying attention to each letter. She set it on the counter between them. "I wrote this 2 weeks ago," she said. "I've been trying to find the right moment. I don't know if there is one, but I want you to have it." Marcus looked at the envelope. He didn't pick it up. "What is it?" "It's what I should have said in that conference room. What I should have said before that, actually. But what I would have said if I had been," she stopped, "if I had been better at being honest with myself about what was happening." He looked at her. "You can read it later," she said. I'm not putting you on the spot. I just want you to have it." Marcus picked up the envelope. He held it for a moment. Then he set it beneath the counter, on the shelf where he kept the things that mattered but needed to wait for the right time. "The statement," he said. "I got the draft Monday. I sent my notes back to Paul Tuesday. I know. He told me your notes were specific and fair. I didn't change the substance. Just the language in 2 places where it was managing rather than saying. I saw your notes. You were right about both of them." Victoria picked up her coffee. "The final version goes out Monday. Industry channels, trade press, the food safety networks. All of it simultaneously, so there's no version of it that lands before the other." And Ronald? Terminated Thursday. His access was revoked before he left the building. "The full investigation findings have been referred to the appropriate regulatory bodies. What happens there is outside my control, but the referral is on the record." Marcus nodded. "The document management system," Victoria continued. "We've brought in an external firm to audit the entire architecture. Paul is overseeing it personally. We're looking at every classification protocol, every access level, every point where something could be buried, the way your reports were buried." She paused. "That work has started. It's going to take months, but it's started. Marcus looked at her steadily. You did everything you said you were going to do. Yes, that's not nothing. No, it's not. Her voice was careful and honest. It's also the minimum of what was required. I want to be clear about that. I'm not standing here expecting credit for doing what should have been done a year ago. I know you're not. A silence moved between them, different in quality from the silences they'd had in the months before, not the silence of opposition, not the loaded quiet of two people negotiating, but something closer to the silence of people who have been through something difficult together, even if they went through it from different sides. The bell above the door rang. Cecilia, arriving at her regular time, who walked in and saw Victoria at the counter and registered it with the specific controlled neutrality of a woman who had been expecting this, and had decided what she felt about it in advance. Morning, Cecilia said to Marcus. Morning. She looked at Victoria. Brief, direct, Miss Sterling. Good morning. Victoria matched her directness without flinching. Cecilia went to the back without another word. Marcus could hear her starting on the morning prep with the same efficient rhythm she always had, and he knew she was processing what she saw, and he knew she would have something to say to him about it, later, probably at the end of day coffee, and it would be something true. She doesn't trust me, Victoria said. She trusts what she can verify. She hasn't had enough time to verify you yet. Is that how you operate too? Marcus thought about this. I think I'm a little further along than she is. But not all the way, I understand that. I want to be honest with you about it. Not to punish you, just because I think you'd rather know. I would, she set her cup down. What would it take? Not asking for a timeline. I'm just asking what it actually looks like. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about, not the polite answer, not the managed one. It looks like time, he said, and it looks like the things you said you'd do continuing to be done. Not because I'm watching and grading you, but because that's who you are now. If it's real, it doesn't need an audience. He paused. And it probably looks like some things I can't predict. The moments you don't expect, where you make a choice and I find out about it later, and the choice is the right one. Those matter more than the things you announced. Victoria was quiet. That's a harder standard than I expected, she said. You fired a man without reading his 41-page report, Marcus said. Without anger, simply as fact. The standard is what it is. You're right. I know I am. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that he saw it. The bakery began to fill over the next hour, in the way it always filled on Saturdays, not all at once but in steady waves. Families and individuals and couples, and the regulars, who came with the clockwork reliability that Marcus had come to think of as one of the most concrete forms of faith a person could be shown. Mrs. Carroll arrived at 8:15 and took her usual place at the counter for her biscuits. Earl came in at 8:45 with his newspaper. The retired teacher who had known Rosalie came in at 9 with her granddaughter, who was 10 and serious, and asked Marcus about the photographs, with the focused curiosity of a child who intended to remember the answers. Victoria sat at a table by the window with her cinnamon roll and her coffee, and she stayed there, not performing anything, not networking, not looking at her phone with the constant attention that people in her position usually gave their phones. She ate her cinnamon roll slowly. She watched the bakery. Lily arrived at 9:30, delivered by a friend's parent, blowing through the door with the specific energy she had on Saturdays when school was not a requirement and the day was entirely hers to organize. She saw Marcus. She saw the woman at the table by the window. Marcus watched her recognize the woman, not the face, which she probably didn't know, but the quality of her, the way she was sitting, the awareness in her posture. Lily had inherited his ability to read a room. It had been a good inheritance. She walked over to Marcus at the counter. She leaned up on her toes. Is that her? She said, at a volume that suggested she thought she was being quieter than she was. Lily studied Victoria for a moment. Victoria, for her part, was looking at the photographs on the wall and appeared not to have noticed, though Marcus suspected she had noticed everything. She looks different than I thought, Lily said. What did you think she'd look like? Lily considered. I don't know. Sharper. People usually aren't what you imagine them to be. Is that good or bad? Depends on the person. Lily looked at her father. Are you going to introduce me? Do you want to be introduced? Another look at the table by the window. The careful Lily look, the one that was assessing something honestly. Yes, she said, I think so. Marcus came around the counter. He walked to Victoria's table. Victoria looked up. This is my daughter, Lily. Victoria looked at Lily with an expression that Marcus had not seen on her face before, and would have had difficulty naming. It was something between recognition and impact. The expression of someone encountering something that confirms what they suspected and costs more than they expected. Hi, Lily said, direct, clear, Keisha's eyes. Marcus's steadiness. Hi, Lily, Victoria said. I'm Victoria. I know who you are. A pause. I know you do. Lily studied her for a moment. Do you like the cinnamon roll? Victoria looked down at her plate, where a roll that had been almost entirely finished sat in its last stage. It might be the best thing I've eaten in a year. My dad makes them. He learned from Rosalie. Lily glanced at the photograph on the wall. We watched all her videos. All 52 of them? Lily blinked. How did you know there were 52? Victoria looked at Marcus briefly. I looked her up. Lily absorbed this. Then she said, with the uncomplicated directness of someone who had decided the conversation had reached its natural transition point. Okay, nice to meet you. And she went behind the counter to find Cecilia, who would put her to work in the way Lily preferred, with actual tasks, not the supervised pretend helping that adults sometimes defaulted to. Victoria watched her go. She's remarkable, Victoria said. I know. She looked at me the way you look at people. Marcus sat down across from her. The bakery was busy enough that Darnell could manage the counter for a few minutes. How's that? Like she was deciding who I actually was, not who I was presenting myself as. Victoria looked at Lily, who was now behind the counter listening to Cecilia explain something about bread trays with the focused attention she gave to things she genuinely wanted to understand. I've been on the receiving end of that look from you since the first day I walked in here. It's uncomfortable. Good, Marcus said. Victoria looked at him. It should be uncomfortable, Marcus has said. Being seen clearly should feel like something. Most people go their whole lives making sure it doesn't. Victoria looked at her coffee cup. I've been thinking about what I told the board. That a company is measured by what it does when the wrong thing was done, and someone has to stand up and say so. She paused. I said it, and I meant it. But I want to be honest with you about something. Marcus waited. I was also afraid, she said, before the board meeting, about what it would cost, whether Whitmore would move against me, whether the investors would question my leadership. I sat with those fears for 3 days before I walked into that room. She looked at him. I want you to know that, because I think it's easy, after the fact, to make the thing you did sound more certain than it was. And I don't want to do that. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. I know you were afraid, he said. She looked up. Someone does the right thing easily. That doesn't mean much, Marcus said. They do it afraid when there's real cost. When they're not sure how it's going to land, that means something. He paused. It doesn't erase what came before, but it means something. Victoria was quiet. Outside, a family was walking past the window. A man about Marcus's age, 2 kids, one on his shoulders, one walking beside him holding his hand. The man stopped at the bakery window and looked in, and his kid on his shoulders pointed at something, probably the display case, and the man smiled and steered them toward the door. The corner, Victoria said, watching the family come in. The development project. I want you to know we found a better site. Not a compromise. Genuinely better in terms of access and visibility. The original plan was this corner because it was the path of least resistance, not because it was right. She paused. Ronald pushed for this site. Marcus looked at her. Because of me, he said. It wasn't a question.
Yes.
He knew I had come here about the property. I think, in his mind, having the company take this corner from you, was she stopped. It was another version of the same thing, keeping you small. Keeping you from having something you'd built. Marcus absorbed this. The shape of it. The way cruelty at a certain level of power didn't always arrive as one large thing, but as a series of smaller ones, each deniable on its own, each adding to a picture that was clear only when you stood back far enough to see the whole frame. I'm going to need you to put that in writing, Marcus said. Not for legal purposes, for the record. The full account of Ronald's conduct, including the development pressure. Because if the regulatory referral goes anywhere, I want the picture complete. Paul is already building that document. Good. The family from outside had made it to the counter. and Marcus could hear the younger child asking Darnell with great seriousness what the difference was between a biscuit and a roll, and Darnell answering with more patience than the question technically required, which was exactly the right thing to do. "I have something to ask you," Victoria said. Marcus looked at her. "The public statement about your termination. The industry statement. I want to attach a recommendation to it, not a character reference, not a soft endorsement. A specific, professional statement about the quality of your work, the level of your expertise, your 8 years of performance at Sterling Foods, signed by me personally." She held his gaze. "You'll have a copy of it before it goes out. You can tell me to remove it, but I want it there." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Why?" "Because the damage that was done to your reputation wasn't just about the false narrative. It was about the removal of the affirmative record. People in the industry don't just know the bad version of the story, they also don't know the good version. The 8 years of good work, the 41-page report. The Saturday you spent building a risk model because the problem couldn't wait." She kept her voice even, but something in it was carrying weight. "I want them to know the full story, both halves." Marcus was quiet. He said, "You'll read it first." "Yes, and if the language manages rather than says, you'll send it back and I'll fix it." "Okay." She nodded. At 11:15, Lily appeared at Marcus's elbow. She had a plate with 2 biscuits on it and a small jar of the local honey they'd started carrying from the co-op farmer. She set the plate on the table in front of Victoria. "Cecilia said, you should try these," Lily said. "She said the cinnamon roll was good, but the biscuits are what she's actually proud of." Victoria looked at the plate, then at Lily. "Please tell Cecilia thank you. You can tell her yourself. She's not scary. I know she's not." Lily looked at her for a moment. "Are you going to come back to the bakery after today?" The question was clear and simple, and entirely without agenda. The way Lily's questions always were, just a genuine inquiry, asked because she wanted to know. Victoria looked at the girl. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the bakery around her, at the photographs, and the handwritten cards and the worn wood floor, and the steady morning movement of people who had made this place part of their week, their rhythm, the reliable structure of their ordinary lives. "Yes," Victoria said, "if it's all right." Lily looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his daughter. He thought about the drive home from Charlotte 14 months ago. The wrong turn, the corner, the faded sign. He thought about 4 months of runway and a legal pad full of numbers and a flour mill family, with a handshake that felt like a promise. He thought about Rosalie's 52 YouTube videos and a spiral notebook called Rosalie's Book and Peach Cobbler made on a Tuesday night, because sometimes the only thing to do after a long fight is make something that tastes like the reason you fought. He thought about the letter in the envelope on the shelf, under the counter, that he would read tonight, after Lily was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, reading the words Victoria Sterling had written when she was finally ready to say what she actually meant. He thought about forgiveness, not the clean, complete, cinematic kind, but the real kind. The kind that isn't a moment but a direction. The kind that doesn't mean forgetting or pretending, but simply choosing, over and over, not to let what was done to you become the whole of what you are. He looked at Victoria. "Come back," he said. "Bakeries open Tuesday through Sunday, 7:30 to 2. Something moved across Victoria Sterling's face. Not relief exactly. Something deeper than relief. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has not been asked to set it down completely, who understands they may carry it in some form for a long time yet, but who hold clearly and without performance, that the door is open and they are allowed to walk through it." She picked up a biscuit. She took a bite. She closed her eyes for 1 second. "Cecilia's right," she said. "These are what she should be proud of." "Don't tell that to the cinnamon rolls," Lily said. Victoria looked at the girl, and this time she smiled, not the managed, professional expression Marcus had seen in boardrooms and across conference tables, not the carefully calibrated warmth of a woman performing approachability, but the real thing. Surprised out of her. Genuine. Lily grinned back. Marcus watched his daughter and the woman who had once ended his world sitting at the table by the window of Rosalie's bakery, talking about biscuits. And he felt the particular full-chest feeling again, the one with no single word in any language, and he let it sit in him without trying to name it. After a while, Victoria stood to leave. She put on her jacket. She picked up her bag. She paused at the counter. Marcus. He looked up from the bread he was slicing. The board meeting. Standing in that room, I want you to know what I was thinking when I was waiting for the vote. He waited. I was thinking about that Saturday you built the risk model. The one where you identified the problem, 12 weeks before anyone else acknowledged it existed. She held his gaze. I was thinking what kind of company deserves a man like that, and I decided I wanted to build one. She paused. I don't know if I can. But I decided that was the thing worth trying for. Marcus held her gaze. That's a good thing to try for, he said. She nodded. She left. The bakery continued. The way it always continued. The way good things continue, when they are built on something real. Darnell rang up orders. Cecilia managed the back with the authority of someone who had decided this was exactly where she was meant to be. Lily moved between helping and drawing and explaining Rosalie's history to a young couple who had wandered in from out of town and who listened with the attention of people who can recognize when they have found something uncommon. Marcus worked the counter. At 2 o'clock he flipped the sign. He locked the door. He stood in the middle of the floor and turned slowly, the way he had turned on. The very first morning he'd come in with the crowbar and the shop vac, taking inventory of what was there and what needed to be done. Everything that had needed doing had been done, not the way he originally imagined it, not along the route he would have chosen, through things he hadn't planned for and losses he hadn't predicted, and a fight he shouldn't have had to fight, and a truth that took 14 months to reach the daylight where it belonged. But done. He picked up the envelope from under the counter. He held it for a moment. Then he put it in his pocket, turned off the kitchen lights, checked the ovens, and went out the back to his car. He drove to Lily's friend's house, where she'd gone for the afternoon. He picked her up at 4. They drove home with the windows down. That evening, after dinner, after the dishes, after Lily had brushed her teeth and reminded Marcus 3 times that her school play was in 2 weeks, and she still needed the right kind of glasses, even though her vision was perfect. After she was in bed with her notebook and her stuffed rabbit and her lights off, Marcus sat at the kitchen table. He made a cup of coffee. He opened the envelope. He read what Victoria Sterling had written. All of it. Every word she had spent 2 weeks deciding to say. The honest accounting of what she failed to do, and what she had finally understood, and what she intended now. Not as a promise that erased what came before, but as a direction she had chosen for what came after. He read it twice. He sat with it for a long time. Then he folded it carefully along its creases and set it on the table in front of him, and he looked at it the way you look at something that you have been waiting for, without knowing exactly what form it would take when it arrived. Outside the night was quiet. The harbor 2 miles away, moving in its slow rhythm. The corner where the bakery sat, dark now, with its outdoor light on, and its faded sign visible to anyone passing, who looked for it, the little painted flowers, the bread loaves, the name of a woman who had started something 19 in 1987 and believed in it for decades, and left behind the kind legacy that doesn't require a monument. Marcus thought about Rosalie. He thought about the 52 videos, and the peach cobbler recipe, and the way the retired teacher had said she cared about real, not perfect. He thought about what it meant to build something that outlasted you, that mattered to people who came after you. That became part of the rhythm of a community's life in the small, essential way that a good bakery becomes part of the rhythm of a life. He thought about Lily asleep in the next room, with her notebook and her drawings, and her mother's eyes, and her absolute, unwavering certainty that the world could be understood if you looked at it directly and asked honest questions. He thought about what it cost to keep choosing to be the man he wanted to be, in the specific circumstances that had been given to him rather than the ones he would have chosen, and about the truth he had arrived at over 14 months of doing it, the truth Lily's teacher had gotten to with simpler words, and that Marcus had come to with harder ones, that a lie gets heavier the longer you carry it, and that the opposite of that is also true. The right thing gets lighter the longer you do it, until one day it isn't even a choice anymore. It is simply who you are. He picked up his phone. He sent one message. To Victoria Sterling's personal number, the one she'd used to reach him on the Saturday, after the farmer's market. He typed, I read the letter. Thank you for writing it. He set his phone on the table. He sat with his coffee in the quiet kitchen. He was 52 years old. He had lost a career, a car, an apartment, and 14 months of a life he had spent 8 years building. He had rebuilt himself from the foundation up in a bakery on a corner in a small coastal town, with his daughter beside him and a woman named Rosalie, guiding them from 52 YouTube videos and one recipe for peach cobbler. That was, when you made it right, extraordinary. He had his name back. He had his truth on the record. He had a bakery full of people who came back every week, because what he had made was real. And he had his daughter sleeping 10 feet away, who would wake up tomorrow morning and ask about the school play glasses and eat breakfast and go out into the world and be exactly who she was, clear-eyed and honest and kind and strong, because she had watched her father, through everything, choose those things himself. Marcus Hayes drank the last of his coffee. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed, and in the morning, as he had every morning for 14 months and would every morning that came after, he got up before the sun. He drove to the bakery. He turned on the lights. He started the bread. Because some things, once you build them the right way, are simply worth showing up for every single day, without exception, for as long as you have the hands and the will and the purpose to do it. And Marcus Hayes had all three.